First off, welcome to episode 50 of Between Two Studs. This is a big milestone for us, and what better way to celebrate it than by having an extended special edition? We're really excited to have our father on for this episode. We've been wanting to have him on for some time now, and we felt like episode 50 would be the perfect milestone to have him on. We hope you enjoy the episode as much as we did recording it. And with that, we'll get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Between Two Studs. I'm Alex Stud.
And I'm Ron Stud.
And Ron, for episode 50, 50, we have Ron Stud. Wait, Ron Stud? You're Ron Stud.
We got two Ron Studs on here.
There's another Ron Stud on the call?
It's me, Ron Stud Sr.
Oh, Ron Stud's great. This whole time, Ron, you've been a junior?
I've been a junior all along. And that's senior.
It took 50 episodes. We figured this out.
We finally got it.
We got a guy on the call. He's the senior. He just lost his video. His video's back.
He's back.
All right.
I'm back.
Ron Stud Senior. Oh, you know what? I'm going to have to call you Dad. I hope you don't mind. Welcome
Just be polite. Right.
It's nice to be here, guys. And I've been listening to most of the episodes. I've enjoyed every one of them that I've listened to, a few that I haven't. But it's wonderful to be here, especially for your celebration of episode 50.
We're happy to have you.
It's been a long process. We made it. No one else we'd rather have on the show for episode 50. So, to get us going, Dad, you know how this works. We always have a shot of Malort to honor not only you, our guest, but also the official spirit of Between Two Studs, Malort. And you're going to be joining us tonight, am I? Yes, you got a bottle.
Yes, I've got a shot glass.
Now that is a mega shot.
Yeah, for real.
This is the mother of all shot glasses.
All right.
It's not that big of a shot, actually. It's mostly glass.
So it looks mostly empty, but it's a full pour.
That's a big shot glass, yeah.
Yeah, but it's all glass down in here.
Yeah, fair enough.
This one comes from Southeast Berlin at a really nice restaurant.
Nice.
I bought it. Paid €5 for it.
Oh, very nice.
Love it. Cheers to you and cheers to Malort.
Cheers.
Cheers to Malort.
So, Pops, how many times you reckon you've had Malort at this point?
My guess, maybe 20 times.
Yeah, and you're loving it now, right?
I'll tell you what, I actually put it in the freezer.
Mm-hmm.
It goes down a lot smoother when it's cold.
I've never done that. I've never frozen it.
Oh, it's good. Actually, it's much better.
Yeah. Ron, have you tried that?
No.
Yep.
I'll have to try it out, though.
By the way, when I say Dad, you should know this, but when I say Ron, I'm referring to my co-host. When I say Dad or Pops, I'm referring to you. You got the rules?
Okay. That's perfect.
Makes sense.
So buckle in. Buckle in. We are going to start the Ember round. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right, question number one. This should be pretty obvious, but it's part of the rules. We always ask the question anyway. What's the story? What's the relationship between Ron Stud and Alex Stud?
Oh, how do I know you guys?
Yes.
You were breaking up a little bit. So I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It seems like one of them is son number 1 and one of them is son number 3, or child number 1 and child number 4 out of 4 children.
That's right.
So you're saying we've known each other for a few years?
We've known each other since you were guys before you were in diapers. Let's put it that way.
Wow.
You could even say you knew us before we were even born. So there's something to that, too. But they didn't have ultrasound so much with
How long have you known me?
Yeah. We've known you since our birth, so yeah.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Am I your oldest guest you've ever had online? on your show. I think I am.
It's possible. It's possible.
You know, I don't know. We don't normally ask
64.
we don't normally ask our guests how old they are. That's not normally
Not always the most polite, but
it's all right. This show is about being polite and impolite, right?
a little.
we
Sometimes.
like to have a little fun. You're definitely in contention. I'll say this: you're definitely in contention of one of our oldest guests. So congratulations if that makes you feel good.
It makes me feel real happy.
Oh, good. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. What are some of your areas of interest, and what are some of your passions?
Boy, you know, I've got too many interests and too many passions, honestly. It's been a good life, and I look forward to just moving into our new retirement community, 55 plus. We've come through 2 hellish weeks of very hard work, and but now getting out, my real passion is getting to know new people, make new friends, and woodworking. And I'm looking at starting a woodworking club here in Ponds at Bayberry is the name of the community. So,
Well, and
lots of passions and interests, and we can talk more about those as we get into this.
and this
Yes,
news,
but I
and
do
this
wanna
is hot
comment
off the
on
press. This is
Just
new
moved into that house, what, a week and a half ago?
This is hot off the press. I mean, you closed your
Actually,
new home that
a
you're
week ago,
recording this in.
last week,
What, 2 weeks ago?
Tuesday, we moved
And a
in.
half ago?
We closed
You
on
just
the
cut
house
Yeah.
a week ago Friday,
So, I'll
the
fill in,
24th of June. And this comes after
Wait, real quick.
22
real quick.
years of living on 29 River
Is-
Ridge.
is-
Yeah,
is-
we
is-
closed
is-
a week
no,
ago
almost
Friday 22 on this.
Go
one.
ahead. Go ahead and stop. We're
So,
going to stop.
First time we
Ron,
ever
what's
built a
going on?
house.
Are you
First time
getting
ever built a
challenges for me
house.
too? And you're in a
Is that-
55 and older community, and you just
Yes.
talked about how you're going to be able to
Guess
join
what?
some clubs and start your own. So it sounds like you're going to find many ways to keep yourself busy.
That's it. We're looking forward to it. And I just took the bikes today, dropped them off to get them fixed and tuned up. So pick those up next week at Bike Line, and
You ready to go?
yes. And now we're just waiting for Mom to retire.
So,
Awesome.
speaking of waiting for your wife to retire, what are you currently drinking?
Actually, there's a 15-year-old single malt Delwini that was a gift from Dennis Mule 4 years ago at my retirement party. Actually, my 60th birthday party, and I'll be drinking a rusty nail made with the finest red label and Drambuie.
I will
So,
be joining you
there we go.
on that rusty nail later for sure. Ron, what are you drinking right now?
So, I'm also going for a rusty nail right now.
Oh, you're having rusty nail right now. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So you're ahead of the curve.
I'm trying. So, I'm using a Glenlivet 12 single malt as the base of that. And then, of course, I think most of our listeners know this by now, but if you don't know it, a rusty nail, you use Drambuie, which is like a honey liqueur that is closely related to Scotch. I'm not sure the complete derivation
It's
with
Scotch
it, but
infused.
it blends super well. You put the two together, and you're in for a really, really nice, smooth Scotch drink that tastes really nice. So, cheers.
And you know, as an aside, it's actually made in on the Isle of
Right.
Skye, which is where Talisker is distilled. So this was a gift from Alex when he got married last year, and this is a grandpa gift or father gift. Sorry about that, Alex. And he's got it etched on there, date and everything. So it's really nice. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I haven't even
And
touched
believe it or not, I actually got that bottle for you 2 years ago because that was our actual wedding date when we got married in 2020.
Because it got delayed.
Yeah. The celebration was last year. And I am drinking. This is probably the first time on the show that I'm having a beer, but I felt it was appropriate for episode 50 to have the beer of our people. The beer of our people, of course, being Labatt Blue. So I'm having this. Ron is wearing a Labatt Blue shirt, polo shirt, which I believe I bought you that polo shirt.
You did.
So we're all just having gifts of one another. Actually, my best man got me this gift, so we're all just he got me the mug. So we're all just kind of sharing things that we got from other people. But I will be having a Rusty Nail later for the second half of the show. And when I drink Rusty Nails, my preferred base is not Johnny Walker Red. It's actually Dewar's. I much prefer Dewar's White.
Dewar's White.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, Dad.
No sense in wasting a really high-end scotch.
Well, no, of course not. You want
Fair.
something. I mean, listen. You normally, when it comes to high-end scotch, you can't buy the what is this? Buy the 1.75 liter. Yeah. I think this is slightly better than red.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Pops.
Now we've got the big question for you, because you've been a listener of this show since the beginning, since the inception. You were there when we were even talking about the idea of the podcast. And one of our questions that we've had that's gone throughout the series, that's been a very difficult one, because Alex and we've even had to answer this last season, the season finale. Pick a piece of art that really speaks to you, resonates with you, or just really you feel is related to you in a way. And tell us about that and why it relates to you.
So this one has been something that every time I've been waiting for someone to give a piece of architecture. And I haven't heard that, I don't think. And
Depends what you mean by architecture.
So
go ahead.
Well, Brooklyn, in this case, the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, I got the audio book by David McCullough. He finished that in 1979. What a great history on that bridge. And when you look at the technology that was put together, and how that bridge at 139 years old this year still keeps going. I mean, it's amazing. And they say with just a little bit of maintenance, that'll stand for at least 1,000 years with the current load and more. So like all good German engineering, over-engineered, but rightfully so. So that is iconic in every way. And so stability, overcoming massive hurdles, technical hurdles, and so on. That speaks to me loudly. And beautiful bridge, absolutely stunning.
Do you find yourself as someone who can last 1,000 years, just needs maintenance?
No, I won't make it that far. No, but I would have loved to have met the Roeblings. You know, it was the father who first came up with the whole thing, John Roebling, and then his son, Washington Roebling, actually finished it up, and his wife, Emily Warren Roebling, actually carried it on, and there's a park in her honor now at the base of, I think, on the Brooklyn side.
That's what I was going to say, is I thought that the father passed, and I want to say that her husband, he had a really bad case of the bends that caused him to be basically unable to do some of the things. And his wife ended up coming through, helping to take care and finalizing and finishing things off, which speaks to like that whole idea of various challenges that come up, and you just go through them and get through them, and you can make it.
Yeah, she wasn't technically trained at all, and yet she, I think his vision really went down to nothing almost near the end of his life, but she was able to describe in meticulous detail and take his orders down to the construction site, meet with all the people that are working on it, and that it's just a magnificent piece of art in every way.
What I find very interesting about that response, and this is just because we know you so well, is that for many years you had an aversion to going over bridges. You want to talk about that? I mean, more or less, I think it's fair to say you had gone your whole life, never had an issue going over bridges, and then one day it just happened.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what. I mean, we'll get into some of the adventures we've had in our lives. Family vacations, family travel is something that luckily you guys have really picked up on and I had a real passion for, and still do. And a lot of it has to do with me growing up poor in the projects, Salamanca, New York, not having a car, and just looking at the sky and seeing airplanes overhead and wondering where they came from, where they're going, and so on. So now that, over the course of my life that I've been able to travel, it's just an amazing thing. So way back, I think it was 1997 or 1998, I think 97. One weekend we were out in Boston, and the following weekend we were doing the thing for 2 weeks out in San Francisco Bay Area. And we went up to Lake Tahoe and so on. But we were staying in Newark, California, which is on the east side of the bay, and we were driving up through into San Francisco, but going through Oakland and across the Oakland Bay Bridge. And I went through the rigid side, and I commented to you kids in the back that there is where in the earthquake of 1988 or something like that, one of those spans actually fell, and I think there's a car or two that fell off.
I think that actually happened during
and
during
maybe
the World
that
Series.
triggered.
It was actually during the World Series.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And maybe that's what spooked me a little bit, but when we came out of the tunnel, there's a tunnel halfway across, and then it turns into a double suspension bridge. And all of a sudden I had this vertigo or something. And I said to Mom, I said, hey, talk to me. She thought, what the heck is wrong? Well, I'll tell you, I was scared out of my wits. You've got 4 or 5 lanes of traffic, all driving at, 60, 70 miles an hour. And you're on this bridge and you've got this vertigo thing going on. I've never been a fan of heights. Heights scare the heck out of me. But all of a sudden I got, cross the bridge by just gripping for, death grip on the steering wheel. Got across the bridge and I pulled off and I said, I can't go anymore.
Well,
and that was the last bridge I went across for a few years of any magnitude bridge.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Dad, how many times had you gone over that bridge prior to that moment?
Oh, oodles. I used to get out to the Bay Area often. So I'd go over that Oakland Bay Bridge frequently. And, all the other bridges around. And the fear got so ridiculously absurd. If I was to go on a trip after that, I would look at the map and I'd say, how do I get to the customer from the airport without having to go over any bridges? Significant bridges.
But I think that's
that's
the thing about phobias, though, right? They don't really make any rational sense. But I think the positive part of this story is you got over it. You want to talk about that really quickly? I know this isn't.
Yes.
I know this isn't normally part of how our Ember Round works, but I think it's relevant, right? Because this was tied. A significant bridge was your choice of what represents you.
Yeah. So bridges are so meaningful in so many ways. They join two things, right? They join two pieces of land, and so on. But how I got over the fear was I just finally said, wait a minute, this is craziness, to have this fear. But I was at a party that we used to have a lot of parties at our house, and very, very good friend, Gary Pirith, and I got talking at the party. We were probably half skunked. And I was talking to him about this fear, and he said, you want to go anytime, I'd be happy to go with you. Well, I said, what if we go on like a Friday or Saturday night at 2 or 3 in the morning when the traffic is really next to nothing? And there's 4 lanes on those bridges, and I drove every lane with Gary. Every lane, I had to drive every lane with Gary, and then then I took a 5th one. I dropped Gary off. He says, what if you don't come back? I said, call a taxi. So, make a long story short, I picked him up, about 15 minutes later, and off we went. And from there, sometimes looking at your fear straight in the face is the way to do it.
So, henceforth, after that, you never worried about going over a bridge again?
I can't say, it's been 100%, but I've never stopped and thought, I'm not going to drive to Annapolis or something because I've got that bridge to go over. So yeah, I've never since then. It's not been a big deal at all.
Well,
Not saying I like it, but it's not a big deal. I love, but the bridge thing, and that is an irony.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting, too, because I know that in one of our father-son trips, we did end up going to San Francisco. And during that trip, I remember one of the things that you wanted to do was walk across the Golden Gate. And I know Alex had done that with me previously, one of the times when we were out there, that first time, right? But I know that we both walked across the bridge that time, too. And that was... I know that was definitely because of the heights. That's another side. It's not just driving. But you want to talk a little bit about that?
That's exactly right. I remember walking across that bridge with you, Ron. We were walking over to Sausalito. Alex was going to meet us over there, I think. But, yeah, I'm not really good with traffic going 50, 60 miles an hour on one side of you, and then 200 and some feet off the cliff on the other side, and you just know people jump off quite frequently. So, no, that was not a... And then you get to the barriers where the uprights are,
go out.
support columns, and then you have to walk out. Oh, I got to tell you, I'm not good with that. So, but what a beautiful bridge that is. And just an aside on that, the color, not too many people know this, the color was not meant to be that red, orange red. It was painted that way for one reason. Initially, it was the primer paint, and then it was going to be battleship gray, just like the Oakland Bay Bridge. But people fell in love with the color, and they've stuck with it ever since. And now that bridge has got its own color.
Right. I was going to say,
Pantone
I think
color.
that's trademarked, that color. So
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
kind of funny how things work out. I do like what you said about bridges. I mean, in a way, by definition, connecting lands together, you're bringing people together. So I think in the same way that you could argue that what airplanes have accomplished, a predecessor to airplanes, right? Being able to just pick up and go to Asia, Europe, a predecessor to that is the bridge, especially magnificent bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge or like the Golden Gate.
Yeah, and I think we'll get more into this too. I mean, bridges make connections, just exactly what you just talked. And the three of us have always just almost too easily, not too easily, just easily made beautiful connections with wonderful human beings around the world. And that is something that we all share in common, and we can celebrate that. That is just a magnificent thing that we do. We like that.
And I think it's good timing to point that out and say a lot of those lovely people that we've made connections with have been guests on our show. So for all those guests, former guests who are listening, thank you. Very good segue, Pops. Thank you.
Welcome.
Last question of the Ember Round. You know this is coming. Name one way how COVID has permanently changed your life, ideally for the positive. And what I think is the caveat, which I think is very interesting, is you retired, mere months before COVID. So this was a very interesting couple of years for you.
Yeah, so it's been a tough couple of years for me. But I would say this. I think that the upside from COVID for me has been just from afar, if you will, because you can't get close, whatever, 6 feet, whatever it is, it comes and goes. But just the opportunity to socialize people. I always treasured it, but I treasure it much more now. And I think I'm not as grumpy as I used to be. So you can ask the grandchildren. I think Grandpa Stud is not quite as grumpy as he was. Some of that's getting older and so on, but I think a lot of it's just, wait a minute, I'm going to actually see these folks in person. And so that has been an upside from COVID. And I think, that's the key answer to that question for me.
Well, with that, I think you have successfully passed through the Ember Round. And you know what that means? Let's hope the audio is working today.
All right, well, here's where we would insert a round of applause for you. So kudos to you, Pops, You made it through the Ember rounds.
Thank you. I was a little worried that I wouldn't make it, but I'm here.
I know.
You managed it.
All of our, I was going to say contestants, but all of our guests, I think they're batting 1,000. So it would have been pretty embarrassing had you been the one that didn't make it.
There's always going to be that one someday.
There's going to be
Maybe.
someday.
Maybe not.
Someday. But welcome to the other side of the show where we get to a little bit deeper dive into you. And I think this is very interesting because I think to understand Ron Studd Sr., you really got to go back to the beginning. I think you have objectively a very fascinating upbringing that I think has had a huge impact on the man you became. So I do want to talk about it. You kind of alluded to it, which is, you were born in Salamanca, New York, which for those listening is a Native American reservation. And you grew up quite poor. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, so poor is a very relative term, but by American standards, I grew up poor. There were a few days we didn't have food. I don't know all the reasons why. I just knew I didn't have food and I was hungry, and those were not good days in my early life. But we lived in the projects, and it was not the easiest going. On the other hand, it's one of those little expressions: "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." I'll tell you, for all my challenges in my early life, I wouldn't change anything, not a thing. It's made me who I am today, and I like to think I'm a good person, and and I like to think some of that's been passed on to you guys. But those values that you earn and learn early on never leave you. And so those are things that I look back on. Always were holes in my shoes, in my boots. My feet were always cold. I had frostbite on my feet and all that. But you know what? I'm still here today, 64, and still kicking.
Well, and
so
what I think's particularly interesting for you is I think a lot of people would see your upbringing and say, sure, maybe it made me stronger, but I don't want to relive it. I have no interest. That's behind me. And yet for, I don't know how many years, 20-something years, maybe more, you did an annual, for lack of a better word, a pilgrimage, where you would start in the projects where you grew up, and you would walk all the way through the town during your normal route because your family didn't have a car, and you had to pick up the mail from the post office every day. You do that, and I just think that's particularly interesting. I think a lot of people would see what you came from and say, I don't want to look. I don't want to look to the past.
Yeah, so I think the old expression, never forget your roots, always holds. So what I do is, and I haven't the last few years, part of it's been the COVID and all that, but other than that, there's not a good excuse. I've just fallen out of it, and I always hoped and wished that I had never done that. But every year, I remember going up one time. I hadn't been up in the whole year, and it was almost like days before New Year's, I think, and I just made it a point to fly on up to Buffalo, rent a car, drove it down to Salamanca, drove it over to the high school parking lot, walked through the projects, walked past our apartment, A305 Hillview Homes, Salamanca, New York, walked uptown, mile and a half up, mile and a half back, got in the car, went back up to the airport and caught my flight home. So it was that important to me to make that, walk that I had made for years and years and years as a kid growing up. I remember going up as early as 4 and 5 years old by myself up to get the mail. And now, nowadays, no one would even think of doing something like that. Letting your kid go out like that.
Yeah, the free.
But in those days, it was safe, and I was never picked on or anything like that. It was just But you look at all these homes, because when you're growing up in the project, every home is a castle, right? So I'd look at my favorite little homes, and still to this day, when I go to Salamanca, I'll always look at those homes. And I've got my number one on and I wish I knew the address. It's like 263 or something on Broad Street. The little green brick home.
Well,
that was my castle. I wanted to own.
And I think I think it's fair to admit, your net new memory is probably not as strong as it used to be. However, your historical memory is incredible. And anyone who says that, I say, go on the walk with Ron Studd, because every home that you walk by on your path, you're like, well, that's where the Johnsons lived, and they had a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and that's where the Stevensons lived. He was the dentist. Like, it's kind of eerie, and part of me would think you're making it up, but I know you're not. Because nobody knows their neighbors like that anymore. Even in small towns, nobody knows every single neighbor and their career and how many kids they have. That is not. I mean, that for good or for bad, that is gone. That was 60s Americana, and maybe it was special to Salamanca, New York, but that definitely does not exist today.
Yeah, I would think it was a little unique maybe for me, but I'll tell you, for kids that grew up with me in Salamanca, I mean, we all thoroughly enjoyed our youth, took great pride in our town, and this will be the first high school reunion that I will miss. It's going to be at the end of this month. I can't make it back. Just can't do it physically and all that. But I got to get up and see my mom, who's still in the nursing home. She's still alive in Salamanca. So when I do, I'll make that. But we were going to have our 45th last year, which would have been the 45th high school reunion, but that got forestalled by COVID, and that was the right decision. But man, this summer is going to be a summer from, an interesting summer for us. But just don't have it in me now to make that journey. But I'll do it before the end of the year. That's for sure.
Well, speaking of, I think where you were about to transition and you cut yourself off is leading us into religion, right? Religion has been certainly a big part of your life, whether or not you wanted it to be or not, right? You grew up a Jehovah's Witness. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what your experience was growing up and how that kind of also really kind of related to who you are today, even?
So, I think it's so important for people to have a value system growing up. And, people look at Jehovah's Witnesses as odd ducks. There's certain things they don't do. They don't celebrate Christmas, so therefore they must not believe in Christ. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of misconceptions probably about most religions.
I think it's fair to say, though, JWs, they're easy to pick up. And by JWs, I mean Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think there's a natural... They seem outside of the traditional Christian denominations. Most Christian denominations are pretty similar. Little tweaks here and there, but there's definitely more of a significant difference with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, so differences is something that, we talk about as society as celebrating, and yet we pick on the easy pickings. Mm-hmm. Why? Because, you learn as a kid growing up, the Christian thing to do is turn the other cheek. And I did that as a kid. And so when some kid picked on you or punched you, you'd turn the other cheek and you'd get it again. So those people, Amish, Mormons, people who are just naturally peaceful, pacifists, they will be picked on. And to me, it's I don't like our society when we pick on those kind of people. You'll hear jokes every once in a while in a movie or a TV show. Oh, is that the more Jehovah's Witnesses at the door? I think that's a terrible thing. I really do. But I don't know. I think there's some people that come out of that experience as being more intolerant. In my case, I came out more tolerant. Mm-hmm. I like differences, and I find those things to be fascinating. So when I got into St. Bonaventure, I had to take three classes in theology, I enjoyed every one of them. Now, goodness gracious, I was a little bit argumentative, I think, with the professors. But then I wouldn't be Ron Studd if I wasn't.
I think it's fair to say.
But in my case, I think
it's fair to
Go
say
ahead.
Jehovah's Witness as a religion, they take the Bible a little bit more literally. The transcriptions as a more literal interpretation, which hence, I think the joke that people always talk about is when they're soliciting and trying to share the good news, right? But what I think is also interesting is because of that literal interpretation, there's some anomalies that seem odd compared to traditional Christian society, particularly in the United States. I mean, you brought up the Christmas thing, which, of course, they don't celebrate any holidays because, from what I understand, all days should be treated equally, which I can get behind. That kind of makes sense. But what I think is also very interesting and probably difficult for most people to understand, and I want to get your thoughts on, was that they don't believe in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance or participating in the national anthem. Now, one, I think it'd be great for you to talk about that, why that is. But number two, what was that like as a kid when all of your classmates are doing something and you're not, and did they think you were being antagonistic or unpatriotic? Like, I think that's interesting, and I want to get into that.
Yeah, so that becomes a tough thing because, Christmas parties and all those birthday parties. There is one, just as a clarification on that. There is one holiday, if you will, that it is celebrated by Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's one day a year. That's Passover. And that's the one that in the Bible is instructed to Jesus' followers to celebrate, to honor. But I mean, it's a tragedy that we look at that and see that as something awful in this day and age, particularly with the not to get too into the weeds here, but the NFL and that. There's a level of respect that Jehovah's Witnesses, at least when I was growing up, we were just inculcated with the notion that you are to respect the flag. You don't pledge allegiance to it because that's a form of worship where you only give that sort of allegiance to God only. So you don't do it for country or anything like that. And you respect the flag, though, because that is what's giving you liberties that you should be celebrating. So these days, it seems like a lot of people don't stand or they won't salute the flag, whatever, because of some, injustice or something brought on them. Well, I'll tell you, every time I come through customs and immigration around the world, I get chills. I really do. I get chills in my back. Why? Because I don't care where I've been. I love traveling abroad, but I love the United States. We have things here that most people, I don't think, appreciate. You can only appreciate, I think, when you get overseas and you see how the challenges that people do have. You talk about poverty. Holy smokes, when you see, horrible poverty like in India or, Philippines or, gee whiz, in Mexico, wherever it is, and yet, again, as I said earlier, poverty is sort of relative, right? I think if the Queen of England stepped into this brand new home, she'd say, oh my God, you guys live like slobs. I mean, this is terrible. How can anyone live like this? So we live just fine, right? So, I think it made me stronger. It made me more acceptive. And I think some people come out of religion just the opposite way. But I left that religion, when I was roughly 17 or so, and never went back. But I respect them. And when the Jehovah's Witnesses knock on my door, or the Mormons, I'm always respectful. I usually take the Watchtower and Awake, whatever it is, and just bid them a fair day and thank them for stopping.
Fair enough. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to break. For all the listeners, just so you know, this is probably going to be a longer episode. Probably going to have 2 intermissions. Because this is obviously episode 50, very special guest. We're going to go to break right now. We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about his upbringing, but we're going to talk about some of his other passions, including when he wanted to be a pilot. So we'll do that when we come right back.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. Wanted to let you know that if you ever need to reach out to Alex or myself, feel free to email us at between@twostuds.com. Again, that's between@twostuds.com. We'll get right back to the program. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with Ron Studd Sr., father of Between Two Studs. And we were just talking about your upbringing. I think another thing that's very interesting is when you got into your teenage years, you became fascinated with airplanes. And you, in fact, wanted to be a pilot. Can you talk about your pilot journey?
So this is a good question. So it wasn't just my teenage years. My father was an avid reader, and he used to love to read to us. So there's an old book called The Grand Old Lady. It's about the DC-3 and what an iconic airplane that really was. It was really the very first plane that was ever built. They made 17,000 of them in total. That made flying a viable commercial thing, and they were safe. But the Grand Old Lady, my father probably read that to me before I was 4 or 5 years old, something like that. And that's where I fell in love with the whole spirit of going from one place to the other so wicked fast, right? I mean, a car can go, 60, 70 miles an hour down a highway. But in the air, when you're doing 180, 200, 250 miles an hour in the air, you're going a whole bunch faster than that. So in the time, the DC-3 was just a very fast plane for its time. And it had all the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to explore and see things, get there quick. And it had all the other aspects too. Meteorology, understanding navigation. And the whole idea of being up in this machine, in this mechanical machine, is like magic, right? So I had this burning passion. And by the time I was 14, I saved up my money from paper routes and so on. And I got my first set of blueprints. I still have them. Just came across them when I moved, of a biplane, EAA biplane. And so I always had this fascination for flying.
What did you want to do with the blueprints? Was it just curiosity? Did you think that you might build a plane?
Yes. So EAA is the Experimental Aircraft Association. Alex, you and I went with Don Hickson, one of my 5 mentors, some years ago, up to Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And that is an association of people who make home-built airplanes. Now, it sounds
you wanted to build your own plane?
Absolutely. So, because to go out and buy a plane, even in those days, was expensive. Nothing like today, though. Today, it's ridiculous money. Most of that's because of liability concerns. But the whole idea of flying as a commercial pilot, being able to go from city to city, a little bit like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life, right? I wanted to see the world. And so that was my thing. So pretty quickly, as soon as I turned 18, I started taking flying lessons. And within 5 or 6 hours up in the air, I went over one day, and I knew it was like an hour and a half drive from my town to get up to this airport where I was taking lessons. And I called the school ahead of time and said, hey, I know it's probably turbulent. And I said, should I stay or should I come? Come on over and we'll go up. Well, that school had so many different training pilots that they didn't know you from Adam. So you may have had this person before or not. And this guy I never even met. So he looked at my logbook real quick, and before you know it, we're up and he's saying, let's do stalls and let's do slow figure eights. and it was bumpy. And make a long story short, it was so bumpy I was getting nauseous. And in those days, you didn't have voice-activated headsets. You sitting real close to each other in a two-seater. You're kind of screaming at each other. And I said, hey, I'm getting sick. And he says, well, open up the air vents and all that. Did that. He said, reach down under your seat, grab a barf bag. No barf bag. He says, don't worry, I've got them. He reached under his seat, no barf bag. Well, guess what happened after that? Yeah,
all over.
The whole instrument panel got covered with puke. And I'll never forget him lining up to come in for the landing, because now he's mad at me. He's smelling puke, and we're bouncing around, and I'm probably still not feeling very good. But I wanted to burst out laughing. He was literally using his finger as a windshield wiper on the instruments to get the puke off the things, off the instrument panels, so we could land, right? Direction and airspeed and all that kind of thing. And but once we landed, then he was like, go home, get out of here. He was mad. I said, nope, I'm going to get a bucket. I'm going to go out and clean it. 4 hours later.
You got a bucket and a mop.
Bucket, sponges, soap. I cleaned
that was a reference to a joke. There's a song.
Yeah. So, but pilots later, they said, that guy should have said, first of all, don't clean up. We've got people to do that. Secondly, you come back tomorrow, we're going to get right back on the horse. We're going to go right back up. Because guess what? That happens to a lot of pilots. So, in their early years. And occasionally, some still get airsick. They're just able to cope with it and still fly.
Do you think had you had a better almost said
instructor
coach,
at school,
but a better instructor that day, or a different instructor, and they would have said that, hey, Ron, you're coming back tomorrow. We're doing that all over again. Do you think you very well could have ended up as a pilot?
Absolutely. The difference, this was like you're chasing a young lady, that you've had your eye on for years, and you finally are now starting to court, and one day she slaps you right in the face, and that's the end of it, right? You're crushed. I was crushed. I wish the guy would have said that. On the other hand, we'll talk about dystonia, my neck condition. I came down with that when I was 44. That would have been an awful short career for me as a commercial pilot. So, in some respects, I'm glad, that it happened that way. In other respects, I still would have loved to see the world for 20-some years as a commercial pilot.
Well, but you did see the world for many years, and you still do. And I think that kind of transitions, right? You stopped your ambition to fly, but that certainly didn't stop your time on planes. Can you talk about some of your world travels?
Oh, yeah. So going anywhere to me was always just a delight. And for years and years and years, I only took window seats if I could get them. So I had a burning passion to travel and again, getting back to George Bailey, you have to pinch myself sometimes. I'm in Seattle or I'm in, Berlin or Munich or something. It's like unbelievable, right? I don't know. It's and the cultures and the food and the music. You guys know what it's like. It's just beautiful. I wish more people would just get on a plane and go somewhere. It's magnificent. Well, and you know what? To be fair, too, you could draw a 30-mile radius around anywhere where you live in this world, and within 30 miles, you're going to find some magnificent things that you overlook every day. So you don't have to travel the world, but it is nice when you do.
Well, and just as a tie back to, I know we were talking about it in the first segment, one of the nice parts about going somewhere else is it gives you perspective. And even when you come back, you can better appreciate the things that you take for granted on a daily basis. And I think that's similar to COVID, right? There's a lot of things that prior to COVID, we just kind of, like you were talking about relationships with others and seeing them in person, how much that really meant more to you after COVID. And I think that that is something about traveling that really is universal, no matter where you go in the world. And it could be, I don't know, 200 or 300 miles away even, which seems relatively small, but I mean, you compare it. We've had guests on this podcast from all parts of the United States and even parts of the world. And every part, like one of the cool parts that we've done is we've talked about like the speed round, right? And even for the speed round, there's so many local cultural things that you just wouldn't appreciate if you didn't have that experience and exposure. And I think that's something that's really kind of cool about traveling, right?
Yeah, and on that point, I think that's the thing. I mean, when the world is so homogenized that there is no difference. There's no difference in language. There's no difference in music, food, anything like that, because everyone's eating McDonald's and so on. That will be a dull world. I like colloquial expressions. Good golly, back in Western New York, there's a lot of colloquial expressions, like so don't I. Makes no sense, but people say it. And it's fun. These are things that make the world interesting, right? So, yeah.
So kind of getting back to that, though, I mean, you've logged in all your years of travel for work, probably well over 1 million miles, right? I think you logged 600,000 on United, probably 400,000 on American, which was U.S. Airways. How would you say travel has changed in the last 20 to 30 years? I mean, I think Ron and I, as relatively young people, are probably spoiled with how easy it is to travel compared to even what it was when you were growing up in the 60s and 70s. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so my age is just at the beginnings of when security started to ramp up. Right when I started early flying, it's like buying a bus ticket, right? You get a ticket and you go somewhere. Hop on the plane, there wasn't any security. But it was about in the late 70s that you started to see all these hijackings and that. And that's when the metal detectors, and before you know it, things worked on up, got worse. DB Cooper, whatever that happened, and so on. But before you know it, then 9/11, and I don't know. It's not as, it's more frustrating now. But once you're in the air, once the doors closed and you're finally taking off, not still sitting on the ramp, you're taking off, you're going somewhere. Then you only have to worry about the dread of going through the long immigration lines and so on when you touch down. But short of that, you're in another country or you're somewhere else. It's fun. Love it.
I think one of the things that shocked me is when you were talking to me about what plane rides cost in the 80s. Not even factoring in inflation, right? The change, but you were talking about how it would cost you $1,500 or $2,000 to fly from Buffalo, New York, to Los Angeles for work. Now, thank God it's work travel; you can expense it. But there's no way if I tried to go out to LA today and expense a $2,000 plane ticket, let alone whatever $2,000 in the 80s was adjusted for inflation. There's no way. My CFO would not approve that. What? So you have to. I mean, I think that's an amazing thing. How from a financial standpoint, how much more accessible flying has become.
Yeah. Deregulation, like in a lot of industries, has really helped the consumer. The concern I have now is safety. I mean, at some point, I think it's a tribute to just how well engineered and how well trained pilots and airplanes are, how unforgiving they are, and the technology of weather radar and so on. That's come so far. But I'd feel better if we were paying more money and I knew that things were getting properly done. Now, there's all sorts of federal regs and on all that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it's almost like, how can you possibly, even to fill the last few seats on a plane, how can you possibly afford to put someone on a round trip to LA for $250? It makes no sense to me. None.
You do it. And I know it's safety's always been very important to you in your career, and we're going to touch upon that. But I will say the positive spin, though, is there are more planes in the air today and less accidents than ever. Now, maybe we're just lucky. I don't know. But I'll say this, even with these horrible incidents with just what happened with Boeing, and we can talk all about that, but we're not going to, I do think flying has only gotten safer based on statistics. And it's a wonderful thing. I don't know how they do it at such low volumes, and maybe that's why they're constantly going in and out of Chapter 11, but they find a way.
Yeah, now, some of the other things that we take for granted, airplane food in my lifetime has never been great, but from even a dinner to salty peanuts or less is not a good thing, right? I mean,
Sure.
That's just not a good thing.
Well, and it's funny, when I talk to, pardon my French, old guys and old codgers, right, is what I was going to say, that they always talk about, when we used to fly, we used to dress up. And that's true, but you used to get a nice meal on the plane. Now, we're lucky. They're throwing, little bags of, pretzels. You hope you get it. It's not quite the same experience. And, if we were being wined and dined like I was going to an opera, yeah, I probably would dress up. But I don't feel guilty about showing up in a hoodie based on the way I'm treated on the plane.
Well, I'll tell you to that end, I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to this. I remember, probably up to about 23, 24 years ago, if I was flying on a weekend where I was flying out and there's no way I could have made a meeting on the West Coast or in Europe or something on the same day, doesn't matter, I'd still be in a suit and tie. You just wore, you just dressed up. You wouldn't sit. You never saw people in pajamas, for Pete's sakes. It's crazy what you see now.
But
right?
but again, I think it's the treatment of what the airplane experience has become. It is now like a bus. If I was getting a steak,
maybe there'd be some dignity still, but
yeah,
no, that went out the door.
Why am I getting dressed up when I'm lucky to get a bag of peanuts?
Well, no, you're not even getting peanuts now.
They don't even give you a full. Most of the time, they don't even give you a full can of soda. They give you just like a little here's what you got.
Here's 4 ice cubes in it, a few drops. Enjoy.
I'm not complaining because I can get from point A to point B for like $200. But I don't feel guilty talking to 80-year-olds who say, "Oh, I used to wear a suit and tie." Well, the experience was a little bit different back then. So
that's why I'll tell you. I think in the end, the overarching thing is you gotta love competition. Sure. Competition makes things better, and I always say, love your competitors, love them, because they will make you better.
Well, and speaking of competition, you introduced Ron and I to the world of loyalty programs at a young age. I remember you beating it over the head. Like, if we were to go on a trip without you, we were booking a hotel, we were booking a flight. Anything. It was like, well, Alex, Ron, did you sign up for the frequent flyers program? And so it's instilled in my head, and I can't help it. It's in my DNA now. I'm like, yes, I'm Alex Studd. I'm married. I'm a husband living in Chicago, and I'm platinum on American, and I'm titanium on Marriott. It's like my DNA. It's like how I introduce myself to people.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's my little ramble. But I have to say, you introduced us to that. And all kidding aside, that helped make travel easily accessible for the whole family. And for that, I'm indebted to you for that, because you gave us the means to see the world using your frequent flyer miles and your points. But I have to probe you on this a little bit, because for those who are listening, I want to talk about just how much you are dedicated to maintaining your status. So you have status on American. You've had it for years, but I know there have been stories where you're cutting it close. It's December 28th, and you're like, I'm going to lose my status. Can you talk about what you've literally done? to ensure that you have status for the next year?
Yeah, so true story, no, in those days, and this was probably like 2013 or 14, something like that. I wanted to keep Executive Platinum. And then those days, they didn't have Platinum Pro and all that. Executive Platinum was top tier. But I was within spitting distance, I was within like a couple thousand miles. And you could buy your way onto it. You could buy up, but it was like $4,000 or some crazy number. So I looked at it, and I was in Japan at the time, and I could see what was left of my travel schedule for the rest of the year, and it just wasn't going to happen. And I didn't want to shell out the big dollars, so I went online and I looked for flights, and I looked at saying, well, I don't want to cut it too short. Nothing would be worse than cutting down and getting within 5 miles or 20 miles or something and missing out. So I saw this flight to Anchorage, Alaska, round trip, and that was going to take me over the top, and I could do it like for $450 or something. Now, how long was I in Anchorage, Alaska? 2 hours before my flight back to Seattle, before my flight back to Philadelphia.
Did you fly home on the exact same plane?
Could have been. I don't know.
I thought it was. I thought it was the same gate.
It could have been. I'll tell you, my head was just spinning by the time I, got to Anchorage, Alaska, and turned around and went back. I mean, unbelievable. But people do all sorts of crazy things, right, to keep their status. Status is a lot, but it buys you a lot of perks.
It does.
Buys you a lot of
things.
It does.
I remember when I was a nobody, and I was doing some of my early travel for work, and I ran into a couple snafus. And at the time, you were top tier. And I remember calling you, and you're like, "I'll take care of it," and you did. It is worth a significant sum. I don't know what the sum is, but it's worth a lot. So much so that you're willing to wake up early on a weekend, drive to Philadelphia, get on a plane, not even a direct flight, go to Alaska, and then come home.
Yeah, that was actually fun. It just wasn't so much fun. It wasn't so much fun, especially on the last leg home from Seattle to Philly. I mean, you're spent, right? You're spent. We've all been there. You're spent, and you just want to get home and say, "What did I just do?" But on the other hand, when you get that Executive Platinum, you're like, thumbs up. This was, looking back, it was well worth it.
I'm just envisioning you being on the plane, and you're a natural chatter like I am. Chat next to the person next to you. I'm imagining you leaving Philadelphia, heading towards Seattle, and you start making conversation with the person next to you, and they go, "Oh, where's your final destination?" Philadelphia. Go, wait, what? We just left Philadelphia. I know, that's where I'm going. I'm going here to Seattle, to Anchorage, to Seattle, back to Philadelphia. Oh, okay, got it.
Gotta get that status.
Yeah. On the other hand, if I recall right, I think I was upgraded on all 4 segments but one, maybe.
Oh.
I think the Air Alaska coming back, which Air Alaska even then had partnership with United or U.S. Airways. So I think the one coming back to Seattle, I didn't get upgraded. So it helps a lot if you're sitting up front on those flights.
Oh, for sure. You got free booze.
That's always a good thing.
Free booze, more room to stretch. And for all of us guys, we're all over 6 feet. That is tough when you're put back in the bullpen.
For sure.
So you wanted a fire rounds. I'm going to give you a quick fire rounds. I'm going to say, name your favorite country you've traveled to. One. I'm giving you one. And your least favorite country that you've traveled to.
Favorite country, Japan. Least favorite country, maybe India.
You had bad experience in India. You got the...
I got Montezuma's revenge only once in my life.
Yep.
And the layover in Singapore was where I paid the price in Ron's apartment, and that was incredible.
But you remember the solution I had to get you home, right? You want to tell people
Bananas.
that? Yes.
Bananas. But here's the funny part. I thought, oh my goodness, how am I going to get home? There's nothing that's staying inside. It's all coming out liquid, right? So I get to the airport, and I said to the checking in, and I said, where's my seat, relative to the toilets? And they looked at me sort of strange, right? And I said, is it possible, can you move me up a couple rows? I'd like to be closer to the toilet.
Can you
Well,
actually
the funny
make my
part is-
seat the toilet? Can I just sit on the toilet?
They put a seatbelt on it, right? So, anyway, I got home, no problem on the entire flight back home from Singapore. Now, I think
Bananas
I went
work,
from
though, right?
Tokyo and then on home, but no problem. Ron's bananas did the trick.
Well, and you know where I
Then
picked that up
for 3
too,
weeks,
right?
nothing came out solid. I lost 15 pounds.
You
know
lost
where-
15 pounds after returning back to the States.
Well, you know where I picked
Yes.
that trick up too, right? That was actually from my zoology class. I learned that part of the way that your digestive tract works, for anybody who's ever listening, if you're ever stuck in a country that just so happens to not sell Pepto, which was the case in Singapore, bananas are very high in potassium. Potassium is something that is also used in binding within your body. So if you don't have enough of it, that can cause a lot of the problems. So if you're ever in a situation where you need it, have a few bananas and you will be fine. And that's what happened with Dad and your trip home. So just as a good
Yeah, I
FYI.
remember. I think I know for sure when I actually exposed myself. First of all, and you're in some of these countries, they'll serve you with a plate and that, with the thumbs and that. Who knows, if people have cleaned their hands and all that. But one morning, the way I do it in the countries like India, I would set my bottles of water next to the
Thing.
sink in the bathroom in the morning. So, but this one morning I was just so out of it. I got up and I was using tap water on my toothbrush.
Ah,
And I looked in the mirror and I was like, "What are you doing?" And I'm certain that's what did it. But the story that actually occurred in Singapore at Ron's apartment, that was the worst. That was like a fire hose, and it was all bad. So leading up to me getting back to the U.S. The next day, just not a good scene, and Ron was cleaning up for weeks after. I cleaned up for hours, Ron. I promise you.
I know
It
you
was
did.
bad.
so the answer to all life's greatest problems, bananas. It seems like that's the answer. Now it's amazing because I think about the Oregon Trail, where people were traveling out west. They kept dying of dysentery, and all they needed was a bunch of bananas. They had a bunch of bananas, and everything would have been fine.
They would have been fine. Just getting bananas out on the Oregon Trail probably would have been a little difficult back in those days.
Can you imagine in those days bananas?
They've been like, what the
on
heck
Oregon
is this?
Trail. No.
Yeah.
Now, in fairness, I must say this. In fairness to the people around the world, I think for sure, and I've heard stories that if people from any given country come to the U.S., if you think about it, our water is not completely sterile. No water is completely sterile. So the microbes we have will oftentimes give them Montezuma's revenge when they're visiting the United States.
That makes complete sense. I mean, you think about it.
Yep.
Even when I travel around this country, different pollens, different things in the atmosphere that just maybe get you a sore throat or whatever. I think that's just natural. You get used to your local habitat. So I'm sure it's the same thing reversed, without a doubt. So
All right, I've got a few as well to continue with the speed round kind of thought. All right, so if you're in another country, if you're traveling the world outside of English, what would be your backup language that you wish you could know? If you could only choose one.
Spanish.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Chinese, no. Spanish, 15, 20 years ago, today it would mean Mandarin Chinese. That would be the language I'd like to know. But I still think, and this is thanks to the British Empire for hundreds of years of exploring the world and dominating the world, they've made English the international language of commerce and of travel. So no matter where you go in this world, if you're only going to know one language. Now, I would also say, for all the poking that we as Americans get because we only speak one language, most only speak one language. It's not like in the over in Europe, you've got pockets of Europe where Delaware would be one country, next to it New Jersey would be another country, Pennsylvania another country, Maryland another country. So within 10 miles of where we live, you've got 5 different languages, 5 different countries. And no wonder people can speak multiple languages.
Sure. And on top of that, guess what happens when someone from France and someone from Germany meet for business?
They speak English.
They speak English because the German might not know French and the French might not know German, but they sure as hell both know English. So it is what it is.
All right, next one. Favorite travel hack. I'll give you more than 5 words on this one, too.
Favorite
travel hack. So something that you know that makes traveling better that most people don't know about.
Well, you know that movie Up in the Air?
Yeah.
Well, in there's a couple of things people, but it's absolutely true. Listen, no shot against Asians. These people can put an elephant inside a 1-foot cubic box and just keep pulling the elephant out all day long. I don't know how they do it. They are very light packers. They do wear loafers. They slip out of them, go right through. So, yeah, I think that's the key. Watch that movie. Watch what happens. Get behind Asians. They know how to get through things. They're light travelers and so on. And when they get to where they're going, the food is fantastic, and it comes out of this little tiny box all day long. Food.
I do think one thing that I learned in all my travels is I used to, and Dad, I don't know if you were like this, but I used to worry about, what if I forget to pack something? You know what? God forbid you forget to pack something. You just buy it.
Right.
It's not worth stressing about, right? You just take care of it. I do think having, and this is going to make me sound crazy, but having an elite credit card, one, that will get you in a bind is good to have. And what I mean by that, we talked about this with the episode of the Alec Artosky. There's been multiple occasions where I was stuck in a city. Last plane canceled. I'm stuck for the night. If you booked it with one of those elite credit cards, and by elite credit cards, I'm talking Chase Sapphire Reserve, I'm talking Amex Platinum, you call them up and they'll say, yeah, you have up to $600 a night to spend on whatever you want. It's fully expensed. The credit card will take it on. It's part of the insurance that's built in with the credit card. And let me tell you, that has saved me literally thousands of dollars. And so anytime someone goes, the annual fee is $600, go, you get in one bind. One bind. It pays for itself.
Well, I think credit cards in general, but specifically the elite credit cards, you're spot on. But credit cards in general, I can tell you, have really eased travel. I mean, in the old days, you would get these things called traveler's checks. I mean, what a mess. And the other thing is, I got to tell you, global communication now with these smartphones, they're universal pretty much anywhere you go. You either, like, I'm on T-Mobile, but, if you get the slightest package at all. But I'll never forget one time when I had several important meetings. I'd spent a couple of weeks in China, and then I was going to fly on to Osaka, Japan, and I had another week in Japan. And my phone stopped working in Japan. I can't remember if it was BlackBerry or what, but I called AT&T and they said, well, we don't understand your problem. There's only one country in the world that your phone doesn't work in. What country are you in? I said, Japan. They said, no, that's the country that it doesn't work in. And that whole week I had a nightmare trying to hook up with people. I mean, they're trying to call you. At one station, like maybe it was in Nagoya or something, I was literally within 20 feet. The guy was right directly below me, waiting for over an hour. And I was cussing and cursing him, and I'm sure he was cussing and cursing me. But we couldn't reach each other because my phone didn't work. So, man, travel with credit cards, travel with, with cell phones. And by the way, the translator option, and it'll actually pronounce what you're saying.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well,
English.
And finally, I have to say, global entry is worth every penny. Don't even question it. If you plan on traveling internationally at any point in the next 5 years, go get that done today. Seriously, that's my PSA for this episode. Go get global entry. It includes TSA pre-check. You're going to save hours of your life.
Yeah,
I may do that.
For domestic travelers, you can get TSA pre-check, I think, with tank full of gas. I don't know what it is, but yeah, TSA pre-check it'll save you time and frustration.
Ron,
it's a no-brainer.
Ron,
I'll get it at some point.
We're wrapping up season 2. We will not start season 3
before I get it
until you get global.
Oh man. Well,
with that threat,
I wanted to throw one more travel hack. This is my own. When you're flying, and especially if you're in a window seat, use this. So when they come down and they're like, what would you like? Instead of the back and forth, like, you want Coke or do you want V8 or would you like this? You're just like, and they're like.
Yeah, actually, that is a hack I've picked up from you, and I learned that actually even in crowded bars or during concerts. You know, you go to the bar and you want to drink, and it's like, I can't hear you, you can't hear them, and
boom.
That's what I want.
So that hack, I don't know. You kids, and for those, show me that.
And for those who are listening to the audio, it just in really large font on your phone, getting like your requests. That'll be like, I want 2 Bud Lights or a whiskey, whatever it is, right? Like just having it written out so you're not having to talk over a bunch of different people.
There's no screaming, none of that.
There's no misunderstanding. Yeah, that is a life hack. That's actually a life hack. That's not a travel hack. I mean, it is a travel hack, but.
Hey, one other thing I'd toss out there too, and I think a lot of people are just afraid of travel. There's some things that happen in travel, right? Here in the United States, wherever. I mean, there's some bad things that happen. By and large, the world is a safe place, thankfully. But people are just magnificent around the world. And if you show the slightest interest in them, they will go 100 miles out of the way. Even if you say a few words like, grazie or whatever, a few simple words. That's all it takes. And you've got friends before you know it that you've never met. And before you know it, you're going to stay in touch with them for a lifetime. So get out there, travel, and enjoy making new connections. That's the best travel advice I have for anybody. The people in the rest of the world are not Martians. These are great people with great differences.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to that is it's a personal story, which is I remember I spent a summer in Japan. I know we've brought up Japan multiple times, but it was such a delightful experience where I got off the train, and these train stations, if you've never been to Japan, these train stations are massive. I mean, we're talking many, many stories. There are what seems like dozens of tracks, and they're coming and going all the time. And I remember getting off one train, and I was a little lost. And I'm trying to understand where in the train station I need to go. And this Japanese man doesn't know who I am, stops me, says, "Do you need help?" I go, "Yeah, this is." I showed him the ticket. And he said, "Oh my gosh, all right, I'll get you there, but we got to run." And you could tell this man was on his way to work that day. He was going to work. He had a suitcase. And he completely pivots what he was doing that day. And we ran together for about 8 to 10 minutes. Gets me to my train station, my little platform. I get on it. It leaves. And I'm like looking back and I'm like, "Listen, thank you so much." He goes, "I'm happy to help." And that was just, he gave up 20 minutes of his day, round trip, right, to walk back. And he didn't know who I was. He was just happy to help. And so I think for anyone listening, I think there's a lot of perceptions that, oh, well, people internationally, they hate Americans. They must hate Americans. The truth is, in my experience, yeah, there's a lot of people who might not like our government. And that's fair. Quite frankly, most Americans don't like the American government. But most people love Americans. At least that's been my experience. Dad, I think we lost your audio.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to come right back. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Ron Studd more about his time as a chemist, his world, getting into the business world, and we're going to talk a lot about where he is today as well. We'll be right back.
Hey, I know what you're thinking. Right now might be a good time to go and get a quick break, but here's the thing. I'm thinking that you could also use this as a good opportunity to like, subscribe, and drop a comment on this video. It would help us. It would also get the search algorithms to make sure that this video pops up for more people. So we'd really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Thank you so much. Bye.
Welcome back to Between Two Studs. We're hanging out with Ron Studd Sr. and Ron Studd Jr. and me. So, Dad, I almost called you Ron, and that felt weird. Dad, we talked about sort of your upbringing, and then you went to college, but a little bit later than most. You went to college, if I remember correctly, around age 22, and you ended up studying chemistry. What made chemistry particularly interesting to you?
So I'll tell you what, science and engineering these were fields that always fascinated me. I remember most of my teachers. Florence Perry was my fourth grade teacher in fourth grade at Seneca Elementary School in Salamanca. And she said to me one day, she just said, "Ronald, when you grow up, you're going to be a scientist." And I just thought, no, I'm going to be a commercial pilot, right? But there's something about science that I just have always loved. And so, to be fair, I started out pre-med. But I had some great professors in chemistry. And these folks and my lack of stick-to-itiveness, actually, to be able to cut through into medical school and go on. I mean, that wasn't it for me. You know, I've had too many other distractions, I guess one could say. So, but I did fall in love with chemistry, and I had great friends, great teachers, great professors, and chemistry just did it for me. I just love it. So to this day, you know, I bring along a few of my little models.
Yeah, and I remember as kids, you would construct these for us. Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, this is so cool because once you understand structure and how things are going on, the rest of it starts to all fall in place. So,
but here's
that one, by the way, was ethanol.
Here's my question for you, though. And I like ethanol, but let me get to you on this. You had 4 children. 0, and I'm going to say that again, 0 studied any science when it comes to college. And, you know, you think about it, you'd say, well, there should be a higher propensity in terms of percentage if you are a scientist that you're going to have a son or daughter that might also study one of the sciences. None of your children studied science. We studied business, we studied economics, marketing, and then your daughter studied being a teacher. What do you think is going on with that? I mean, that to me, that seems like a massive problem. Not just with your kids, but holistically, we have a generation where we don't have enough people getting into the sciences, and I think we are going to run into some serious problems down the road. What do you take from that?
Yeah, this is something that's given me a lot of pause and concern. I remember one of the rebuttals to one of the State of the Union addresses a few years ago. Some guy went off on the fact that we've got to get kids, and particularly girls, through STEM into the science and engineering. I'm not so sure that the numbers have been changed much, if any at all. I'd like to see that. But at the time, and I'd like to think this was like maybe 16, 20 years ago, the guy said, look, Germany, wait a minute, let me back up, just to plan a reference. The United States that year was graduating 56,000. Half of those were foreign students, okay? But the rest were engineering and sciences, and that included PhD and undergrad, okay? But at the same year, Russia was graduating 250,000, China was graduating 250,000, Germany was graduating 200,000, and so on.
Particularly, just to make sure,
look,
their degrees were...
What happened after World War II is these kids came home, and a lot of them had, GI plan, bill, and they went on and studied science and engineering. This was the heyday. This was leading up to the Apollo missions and so on. This was the age of change. And somehow I almost think technology has been absconded with by computer science. People think computer science is the holy grail. And it is, to a huge extent. That doesn't say we don't need material science, biology, and physics, and so on, because all these things are the underpinnings of what we need to go forward on. The electronic stuff all benefits by all the other sciences and engineering. We need to get kids into the sciences and engineering. I don't know why I didn't get any children that didn't study that way, but I almost think it's sort of odd. I would say that our family is not in any way different than a lot of families. Although I would say accountants tend to, give birth to accountants. I don't understand that. I mean, accountancy just didn't turn my knobs. Mm-hmm. But science and engineering, why? I don't know if they see that it's too difficult or it's just seen to be boring. They got burned out because they had a bad teacher in high school or college. And early on in science and engineering, you go through some courses that are just, they'll peel the paint off the walls, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's not the easiest thing to do, but I think that's the answer. I don't think it's the easiest thing to do in life. We do need to make it much more interesting and fascinating. If there are teachers teaching science and engineering that are dull, get rid of them. Get out of the way because you're screwing it up for other kids. This country needs more than just video game players. Just today I saw that video game playing was going to be added maybe as a major to a university, and maybe as a sport in the Olympics. I can't remember. Something came across this today or something.
Well,
I think computer science is fascinating.
What you're talking about is esports.
You need the underpinnings of all the other sciences and engineering to really explore and to really make headway.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point, because I know that even for me, and now I'm looking at things through the lens of my daughter or your granddaughter at this point, and I definitely feel like there definitely are teachers that I think that are in middle school, elementary, and high school that are really just, I hate saying it, but they're just teaching to teach. where it's like, okay, it's a job, it's a career. They don't particularly have a huge amount of passion for it, and they're maybe mediocre or maybe they're average, right? I think it's a very difficult situation to find people who are very passionate about it. And case in point, my senior year, actually my junior and the first part of my senior year of college, I had a professor who was my botany and zoology professor. I think had I had her as a first freshman, college, I think that would have significantly changed the view that I had on considering sciences as a major. And I think part of that was she was a very passionate professor who she did a lot of research with horseshoe crabs, right? Specifically about like their blood type and how that's being used in various medicinal purposes, but she was really interested in the life cycle. Seeing the practical aspect of where that kind of fits out, and then also having that passion and really kind of also having high expectations. I think that's what's maybe a bit challenging, at least from my experiences. If I had somebody like that who is a lot more engaging, that really kind of said, yes, it's difficult, but here's why it's worth it. This is why I'm so passionate about it. And more of that in academia, I think that would probably have more of a positive influence. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's exactly the point. It takes a level of curiosity, no question about that. That's a main ingredient into just about study of anything. Mm-hmm. But if you look at that movie Stand and Deliver, and I got to talking one night with this guy who was part of a PBS special on that man, and I can't remember the guy who played the part in the movie Stand and Deliver. But you look at the passion that he garnered out of those students, and for them to go from arithmetic to mathematics and taking on, and leading the state of California with AP Math in this underprivileged school. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's incredible. So the sharp minds can be turned on by people with serious passion. And we need that right now. We desperately need passion for the sciences and engineering. But you turn on TV, it's all about cops. It's all about, lawyers and so on. But there's really little, the closest it comes to now is forensic science. And so people look at forensics and say, I want to study forensics because that seems real sexy and all mm-hmm. that. I'll tell you what, to me, taking apart dead bodies and all that, it's got to get old real quick. The other problem with the sciences and engineering in this country is that few people like me actually ever stayed in it. So I was a chemist for 10 years. I did a lot of good work, had a lot of great colleagues that did magnificent work, and I learned from. But we desperately need people who have a passion for the sciences to stay in it, too. Mm-hmm. And that's just not happening.
Alex,
So, Dad, to that point, you didn't stay in chemistry. One, what were you actually doing while you were a chemist? And number two, why did you leave? And I know you ended up pursuing your MBA, and you went more in the traditional business route. Walk us through that journey.
Yeah, so, if you're a person in R&D, and that's where I started out. I started out in applied research for a company that is now part of Henkel Electronic Materials. But in those days, Dexter Hysol was one of the premier, if not the premier company in the world when it came to electronic materials. Electronic materials were encapsulants and so on for all the devices that you see, as semiconductors, optoelectronic devices, you name it on a printed circuit board, those devices, we were the premier supplier for the board, all the way on up to solders and so on, all the way on up through to all the items you see on a printed circuit board. So the journey was 10 years, and I felt like, oh, gee whiz, at least I earned my wings. And early on, I had an option to leave R&D in the company. They said, hey, this guy's pretty good. He's good on his feet. He'd be good in front of customers and so on. Hey, let's make him customer service manager. Make a long story short, one of my boss's bosses said, hey, Ron, I think you've got too much passion for this. I don't think you've properly earned your wings. I think you'll regret leaving R&D only after a year. And make a long story short, that worked really well for me. I stayed with R&D. I looked at him and said, he's a smart guy. His name is John Sparpenny, and fascinating individual, PhD in physical organic chemistry. And I stayed in R&D, and I loved every minute of it. I traveled at least half the time of my years in R&D, and I loved that too. So I loved that interaction with customers. You know, you hear terms like voice of the customer and so on. I was right there hearing all of it, and right there being part of their development as well. So that was a magnificent experience. The difficulty is holding those kind of people like Ron Studds in R&D, and that is a quandary, because what to do? I mean, you cannot lose all your people out of the science off the bench, if you will. I was formulating materials, taking puzzle pieces, putting them together, and finding solutions with a team of other folks, the guys I worked with, people I worked with, magnificent, intelligent, brilliant people. And it was just a lot of fun, But I did have a bent, right? I had a social bent, and most of that wasn't being satisfied at the bench. And so therefore I ended up naturally kind of flowing into my MBA, which I had finished a year. I started a year after I finished my undergrad in chemistry, and then a few months after I finished my MBA, I went into marketing, product management, and so on. Ended up on my career in sales management and then general management. So, but I love it, because as you move up, it's like leading an orchestra, right? That's the thing. In R&D, you're playing, you may be the number one in your violin section, but you're not leading the orchestra. And that was the beauty, the attraction for me.
Yeah. Well, and I just find that very interesting, because how do you keep, to your exact point, how do you keep the Ron Studds engaged and to stay into the sciences? But I understand you're very extroverted, you're very social, and you ended up more into the business route, the business side of things. And, one of the things I wanted to talk about was there was a very pivotal moment in your life, in your career, that impacted everyone in your family. By that point, you had 4 children. So you're talking about a family of 6 that were living in Olean, New York. And there was an opportunity. There was things going on at Dexter, for sure. But you made the choice to relocate. You and your wife, our mother, made the choice to relocate the family hundreds of miles from where you grew up, from where Ann, your wife, grew up, to this place, Bear, Delaware. And now you just moved to a place down the road from Bear, Delaware. What a gamble, I would think. Can you talk about what that experience was like? I mean, Ron was a junior in high school going into his senior year. There was a lot going on. You had Kate, who's a freshman, if I remember correctly, going into her sophomore year of high school. I mean, these were trying times. And fortunately, moral of the story is everything worked out. But can you talk about what that was like in your mind? I mean, that must have felt like a gamble.
Yeah, so there again, it's all relative, right? Can you imagine going back 140, 150 years ago, the people on the East Coast? Here they were completely set, had a great life, and someone walks in and says, hey, let's take this horrible journey to California because there's gold to be found and there's land being given away.
I hope they took bananas.
Yeah, let's hope they took bananas. But at the end of the day, I mean, that gamble that I took was nothing compared to that. So it's all relative. Looking back, though, it was time for a change. I think, as you guys have found, and I've certainly found too, that the best managers out there are not one company people. I mean, you go back a generation before, 2 generations before me, it was great to have an asset that worked for your company for 40, 50, 60 years. Fantastic. Nowadays, I think that has changed. And it varies by industry, but not too much. You're best to have several different companies' perspective as you come to the table. Why? Because then you look at problem solving several different ways. You can draw on that, and that can enrich the company that you're working for. So it was time for me to probably move on. I had a great career going. I could have stayed there. My next move would have been either Connecticut, because we were at the time being bought by Loctite, or out to California, or I had other options as well. But there's something about change, and the change for us, yes, it was a little bit of a gamble, but man, you look back at it, and I just knew it would turn out like that. But I remember sitting down with each one of you kids and saying, hey, is there anything here that, if you guys are upset about this move, whatever, and you were all on board, nope, let's go for it. Now that's the spirit of let's do something different. It's not that we had a bad life. We had a good life in Olean, New York. We had friends and so on, but we still stay in touch with all those folks. Thank goodness to communication and all that. But at the end of the day, man, I don't know what we would be today if we didn't make that change. We've enriched our lives in many ways, and economically too.
And
that money has never been a motivator for me.
And as someone who's only 9 years old when we made that move, I do agree from my perspective with everything you just said, although I was young. One thing, though, I think is interesting is here we are 22 years later. You had 4 children. Only 1 remain in the state of Delaware. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? What are your thoughts?
I think, like nature, you want to raise your nest, and you want to see these youngsters fly off into the new world. And the beauty, we talked about travel, and our that's a passion the 3 of us share extremely in passion, with. Just love traveling. So the fact L.A., Atlanta, Chicago, 3.5 miles away now, Kate in Delaware with her 3 lovely girls. But, and we'll be down to see Ron and Evie and his wife Susan. But, it's great having kids from around the U.S. I love it. I say it with great pride, It's a great thing. Love every minute of it. So good for you guys for spreading your wings and flying off and providing us a place to go visit in the holidays.
For sure. And I think that goes back a lot to what we were saying about traveling in general. I know Alex, he's moved to a few different places. I know for me, even there was time when I was in Singapore, we've all kind of had this lovely opportunity to kind of see different parts of the world together in our own different ways. And I think that really does help with your own growth. And I think that there is something too where I think that there has been definitely some neuroscience investigations where it's like having varied environments does a lot for you cognitively. Even for you recently just moving, right? You didn't move that far, but being in a new environment, being in a new experience, seeing all these different people, it does a lot to just refresh, recharge, and mentally it puts you in a place that it really refreshes you. And I think that that's something that I don't know that we would have gotten that had we not moved to Delaware originally. yes, it was a challenge. It was my senior year, and that was definitely a challenge. And I remember you offered for Mom and I to stay back in Olean if we wanted to, so I could finish out my senior year. And I always appreciated that. But I think moving to Delaware was the right move, and I'm glad that we did it. And I think that that's been a great move for all of us in general.
There is a point in anything, where you've had too much spaghetti, you've had too much lasagna, it's the furniture's been in the same place for too long. Mm-hmm. I call it time to change the wallpaper. And we were at that point where it was time to change the wallpaper. And that was a great experience. And how you kids came through that as well as you did and shining like you guys did, I think within a year or so, I think I remember asking from time to time, just get a pulse. And you know what? You guys were always right with it. And I remember our HR director, she always told me, her name's Pat Krebs, and now she's retired down in Florida. She said, Ron, of all the moves to go wrong, yours had all the makings for something to go wrong badly. And yet yours went really well. She said, that is a phenomenal feat in itself. And the best move, I think, the best reload she's ever done, I think is what she said. And so that speaks to you kids, speaks to Mom and I as individuals. But, yeah, it speaks to the company of Arlon that drew me and the state of Delaware.
I think what's interesting is, again, I was very young when this happened. But I reflect back on it now is I think I looked at you as you were a 42-year-old man who, by and large, had never left Western New York. I looked at Mom as someone who had lived 39 years in Western New York. And I look back now on that, and I think, had I been raised and lived and graduated from high school in Olean, New York, I think I would have been fine. But what I have felt, there was this world that was possible for me. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think somehow by you moving to Delaware, it opened the world to me to say, it's okay. It's okay to live somewhere that you didn't grow up. And so it gave me the opportunity when I graduated college to say, what if I moved to Boston? And then after that, what if I moved to Austin, Texas? And what if I moved to Chicago? It's almost like by moving to Delaware in the year 2000, it ripped the Band-Aid off for me to say, it's okay. You don't have to stay in one location. And so to me, I think that's the biggest takeaway. I look back at that time period.
Yeah, I think, a couple of times earlier in this episode, I've made mention that made reference to It's a Wonderful Life, right? George Bailey. Now think about George Bailey, though. He was the opposite of that.
Right.
For some reason, he always got stuck. And yet, look at the impact that he made. So for all the people that didn't leave Salamanca or Olean, New York, you know what? These are wonderful human beings, too. So I'm sure they're doing just fine. We would have done just fine, too, I'm sure. But for us, it was a time to change. Just get out, do something different. Go for a Sunday ride, move to Bear, Delaware. What's the difference? I mean, but it was a great thing for us, and I'm just so happy to see you guys, each one of you, doing so well in life, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good point that you bring up. By no means am I disparaging anyone. I mean, you and Mom lived into your 40s without ever leaving, a relatively small space. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm saying is I think it opened up the opportunity to say, wait,
yep.
I can just do that? I can just pick up and move? That's even an option? Whether you choose to take that option is a totally different conversation. It's the idea that the option is even available to you, I think is worth noting when we look back at what that move was like in the year 2000. Okay.
Look, I know we've covered a lot of topics. Can I toss one out that I'd like to cover?
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, two, I'll make mention real quick. Mentorship. One, mentorship is something so important to me. You know, if a person has one mentor in their career, in their life, they're lucky. Guess what? I had 5. Bill Smith, Don Hickson, Hugh Dotson, Bruce Toyama, Lisa Ryan. These are magnificent human beings that I all worked with at Dexter Hysol, Dexter Electronic Materials. And I still stay in touch with Bruce and Lisa to some extent. And unfortunately, I've lost 3 to death. Bill, Hugh, and Don. Great friends, great mentors. And I would just encourage all the listeners out there, and you boys, if you can be a mentor to people, be a mentor. And what is a mentor? Someone that kind of just gives advice to it, and it can be a sounding board. At 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, you call this person up and you say, I'm really in a jam right now. I need your ears. What do you think? And you make sure that you lay that at your doorstep. Hey, call me anytime. You have something, that's why I'm here. I'm your friend. I'm your mentor. I want to help you. That's a mentor. And real quickly on the frequent flyer thing and the loyalty programs, I'll tell you, Bruce Toyama, God bless Bruce. He was my mentor, and I can tell you, he said, Studley, tonight you're going to sign up. And he just made me sign right up there. And it was a Courtyard Marriott in Fishers, Indiana. Yeah, it was in Fishers. So, you know, that's the thing. And guess what? That carried on to you guys, right? So mentorship is a big one. Help people. And you know what? The payback is beyond reasoning. The other thing I want to talk about, and I have to give a shout out. I want to show this because I tend to get on these soapboxes, and a great friend, great friend. He's been in Olean area his whole life, and you guys know him well. He made me this box back in the 80s or something, like early 90s or something like that, and it's literally a soapbox, but he put 2 feet on it where I can stand and put my name on it. Ron Studd, right?
Yep.
Soapbox, and it opens up, and inside was a bar of soap when he gave it to me. A bar of ivory soap. But friendships mean so much, and me being on my soapbox. So now I'd like to spend a little bit of time on my soapbox on my condition.
Yes.
You know, talked about my early retirement, and you know what? It wasn't my choice. I had to take an early retirement because of my condition.
Well, and Dad,
Dystonia.
And Dad, so yes, I wanted to get into that. I'm glad you brought it up. Because kind of switching gears, if I remember correctly, you were around 44 years old. And one day you just woke up with a sore neck, which, by the way, most of us do. But for some reason, your sore neck, which you thought was just a sore neck, turned into be something else. So I just wanted to make sure we set the stage. Why don't you talk about your condition?
So, I mean, I was 44, and it was right during budget period, and which was always about October. And I was 2 years at Arlon, and I woke up with a stiff neck. No big deal. I'd woken up with a stiff neck probably hundreds of times in my life, but by 9, 10 o'clock, they're gone, right? Mm-hmm. Well, this time, 2 weeks went by, and I didn't really give it any thought because my mind was so focused on getting the budget in, the numbers right, and all that. But I was walking down the hall, and this fellow colleague of mine looked at me and said, Ron, his name is Bill Black. He's in accounting. He said, Ron, do you have a stiff neck or sore neck? I said, yeah, it's been bad. Now that I think about it, it's been going on like 2 weeks. Well, that was the beginning of my journey with cervical dystonia. Now, dystonia can be any part of the body can be affected, and it's pretty much a muscle group that's going into spasming, uncontrolled spasming. So it could be your arm, it could be kind of like this all the time, and that's because your bicep is just spasming all the time, but that you never leave that. Mm-hmm. It's just constantly in it. And after a while, it really hurts badly because of the lactic acid and so on that builds up in your system. In my case, it's my neck, and it's the most common form of dystonia. For treatment, there is no cure, and there's not a certainty as to how many people have dystonia, cervical dystonia. My form is called idiopathic because nobody knows what the cause is. Could be genetic, but maybe it's something else. Could have been a lot of things in my life. Early exposure to toxins, and I know at one point in my career, early on, I was distilling methylene chloride, a very nasty chemical. So who knows what caused my dystonia? But it's a terrible thing. I've been fighting with it for years. I get 500 units of Botox injected into my neck every 3 months by a neurologist at Rutgers University.
Can you talk about what does Botox do that is supposed to help alleviate your condition? Because most people know what Botox is, helping with my wrinkles. It's
right.
Cosmetic.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's related, right? It's used for so many things now, migraines and so on, but it's all related. Botox does one thing. It deadens nerves to relax them. So for wrinkles, for migraines in the skull and that, sometimes your muscles can be as thin as sheets of paper, but the nerves that are controlling them are giving false signals to be constantly spasming, tightening up. The Botox is going to go in there and sort of deaden it and release it. But it only lasts like 3 months, and then it's going to go back and do what it did before. So in my case, I've been getting the injections for, golly, now 20 years, I guess. 20 years, yeah. So now, cosmetically, most people who get cosmetic Botox are getting between 20 and 30, 50 units every 3 months, maybe. Okay? I'm getting 10 times that, 500 units every 3 months. And this has been going on for years now. Started out around 200 and then it gradually worked up. Is it giving me much benefit? I don't know. That's the sorry part. I don't know. I know one time I stopped. I said, hey, I've had enough of the Botox. I want to give it a break. And I got to tell you, my neck went into such horrible pain. I was on the floor wreathing in pain. I couldn't get off the floor. And if I had a gun, I don't know what I'd have done with myself. Mm. That's how bad the pain was. It was ridiculous. So I continue to get the injections only because I don't want to ever experience that again. Now, a few years ago, I talked to my neurologist, and she said, have you considered DBS? DBS, deep brain stimulation. And that is, think of a pacemaker, and for those that are seeing and viewing this thing, I don't know if you can see it, it's in my chest. It looks like a pacemaker. But now there's a lot of wires that run up to the top of run up under the skin, up behind my ear, and then to the top of my skull, to 2 5-inch spikes that are buried in my head diagonally, going down to where the spinal cord meets the brain stem.
So it was literally, quite literally brain surgery, what was going on
here. Yeah. And you're just kind of hoping, because they're going through your left and right lobes of your brain, right? And you're just hoping, well, let's see, let's make sure they don't hit anything that's going to...
Well, and is it true? I mean, they were playing with millimeters
The precision has to be within 0.2 of a millimeter.
2/10
of a millimeter.
of a millimeter.
Jeez.
Got it.
Of placement, yeah. So, and there's a controller on this device, and the controller can be programmed with 3 different parameters, voltage, amount, on time, amplitude, and frequency, and there's another one I'm not thinking of. But the point is, I had this brain surgery, and probably see, some pretty serious cuts into my head.
Let's just say, for anyone listening or watching, for that matter, you'd always been thinning on top, but I would say the thinning escalated after this surgery.
Yes. And I had all these staples, stapled in my head. It was not a pretty sight, and it was a horrible, painful thing to go through. $250,000, we got the bill just to see it. The insurance covered the vast majority of it. 2 different procedures, all at Rutgers University. But the downside is I cannot tell you today, and I may be somewhat unique, although from being connected with probably now hundreds of people around the world with dystonia and Parkinson's, whether or not there's much benefit to be gained. I think it's very hit and miss. Some people get great benefit, and other people get very little. And for me, I know I've got a unit that can actually turn the system off, and I don't find any difference whatsoever.
So let's talk about that.
Leave it on.
Let's talk about that, Dad, really quickly. So the idea, and let me make sure I understand it, and then you fill in the gaps. The idea is this. Think of it as a pacemaker, as you said, is lodged in your brain. And the idea is that it is emitting a signal of some sort with the idea that it's trying, in the perfect world, trying to train your brain, because your condition is neurological, to stop firing these signals to your neck to where you're tensing up, which is causing your immense pain, and where you also lose control of the functionality of your brain. Right? It's not just the pain; it's also the motion. And so that's the idea, right? Where it's supposed to basically stop the communication, the false communication between your brain and your neck, right?
That's right. So you want to be able to take muscles that are supposedly voluntarily controlled. You want to turn your head to the right, or you want to tighten up your bicep, and make those so that you can control them, or that they're not just being tightened, just spasming without control. So even if you lost control of them. So the early technology was more or less, hey, let's just cut the nerve. Now that technology is certainly advanced as well. They call it selective denervation. So they can go in and cut a nerve. But the problem with that is your muscle, this condition can actually move to different muscle sets in your neck or in your body. And then if you've cut nerves, well, there's no hope. Your head might just lay your spot over.
Yeah. It's a one-time
I'm overly
thing.
simplified. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to do that. That's a last-ditch effort. So in this case, I've gone through a great journey here. But, this is one of those things where when life gives you, bad tequila, you make good margarita.
That's a classic for anyone listening. There's a band called Yacht Rock Review. Check them out.
Great band. I've got that from Alex, Yacht Rock Review. Or more commonly known as Life Gives You Lemons, make lemonade. I don't know. I'd like to be able to get rid of this condition. It'll never go away. I'll die with it. But On the other hand, I've met a lot of wonderful people who have the same condition or similar condition, and it's sort of semi-related to Parkinson's, and I've met a lot of those people and connected with a lot of those people. We've all got, in the old days we would say we all have crosses to bear in life, and some of them are heavier crosses than others. The trick is not to lose hope, and hopefully in medical science, if not in my lifetime, in the next lifetime, this will find a cure, one way or the other. And hopefully it's not genetic, and that you kids and your kids won't have this. That's the real hope. And I wouldn't wish this on the worst enemy.
And that is certainly a hope. But when you look back at this condition, which, as you said, will inflict you for the rest of your life and causes immense pain, I know you'd mentioned the crosses to bear, all of that. But how do you think it maybe has shaped your outlook on life? I know it forced you to retire prematurely. Do you feel resentful? Do you feel angry? Kind of what's your outlook from the condition?
Yeah. No, I don't feel resentful. I don't feel angry. We talked about perspective of being poor, perspective of, different aspects of life. I saw a great 60 Minutes episode this past Sunday, or maybe it was the previous Sunday, of a guy who was an architect, a great architect, and now he's a blind architect. He suddenly lost his vision. Well, he actually is doing exceptionally well as an architect, and now he looks at it and says this is giving him new insights into how to design for those who are handicapped with blindness. Hasn't held him back one bit with being an architect.
That kind of reminds me of Beethoven, who wrote the Ninth Symphony completely deaf. Right?
So that exact same thing. And they asked him, hey, if you could wave a wand more or less and have your sight back, would you do it? And the quick answer is, well, sure, but I'm not so sure it would change my life or improve the value and improve the quality of my life, because I've adapted well to being blind, and it's giving me new eyes, if you will, as an architect. So to answer your question, this feels like someone's tying a noose around my neck 24/7. It never goes away. I feel awkward even sitting through this. My postures, I'm sure, look a little strained and so on. But on the other hand, this isn't cancer, right? This isn't something that would kill me unless I get in a bad car accident because my head wouldn't turn. So, on the other hand, makes you appreciate life differently.
Well, and I think...
So, getting back to crosses, and that's the thing.
I think you bring up an interesting point, though. And I want to end this part of the segment, but if I remember correctly, it took you almost 2 years to formally diagnose with this condition. During that time, there was discussions, do you have certain conditions? Do you have something like Lou Gehrig's? Do you have something like, conditions that could have been, I don't want to say worse, but could have had a significant alteration on your lifespan?
Yeah, and to that, and I think that's, again, a reason why to put a good part of this segment on dystonia is awareness. Because most people with my condition take, on average, 7 years to be diagnosed.
So you at 2 years, that was early.
Yeah. Why? Because I was just running from one crazy doctor to the next. And finally, I got a good doctor who was able to put two and two together and said, wait a minute, have you ever heard, cervical dystonia or spasmodic torticollis? These were Greek words to me. And I'm like, no. Well, we're going to do a test, but it seems like maybe that's what you've got, which is sort of like, oh my God, once you can put a name to something, that means a lot, right? So in this case,
especially in a neurological condition, right? Because I'm sure there's a part of you that thinks to yourself, am I going crazy? Right? There's no physical evidence of what's happening here.
Right.
You can't take an X-ray that'll say, oh, there's where it is, right? So I'm sure there's some validation in some ways.
Well, yeah, and to that excellent point, I think going way back, unfortunately, people were considered crazy. There must be something mentally wrong with these people, whatever. This is not the case, and my hope is that in the next 50, 100 years of medical science, there's much more progress on mental health, on neurological conditions in general. I think in the last 100 years, there's been tremendous physiologic disorders that have been dealt with, but stuff like cancer and neurological disorders, mental health and all that are certainly not where they need to be longer term. There's a lot of great improvement. Hopefully good people, smart people go into these fields. We need them. We need these bright young minds.
I was going to say, going back to the earlier conversation, we need young people getting into the sciences for sure. So here's what we're going to do. We appreciate you kind of giving us an inside scoop into a very personal medical condition you've been dealing with for almost 20 years now. What I want to do, Ron and I, we want to go to break. And when we come back, we're going to finish up the episode, and we're gonna stop looking at the past. And don't get me wrong, the past is important. The past is informative. It helped define who you are. But I want to spend the last segment of the show talking about the future, talking about where Ron Studd is going. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to get into that. Be right back.
Wonderful.
Hey everyone, Ron here, and I want to take a quick moment to thank you for being a listener. But one thing I'd ask, if you're able to do so, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could give us a review of our podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or join our Discord server. We'd greatly appreciate it. And we'll be posting a link to our Discord server in today's episode. Thank you so much.
All right, welcome back to Between Two Studs. We are wrapping up. This is the last segment of the show with Mr. Ron Studd Sr. And, we really just covered a lot of years. We talked about from your beginning, we were playing armchair psychologist all the way through much of your life. And what I want to spend the rest of the segment on, Ron and I, is talking about the future, talking about kind of where you see the rest of your life. And one of the things I think is an interesting point that I wanted to call out, me particularly, was it's been proven by science that as one gets older, they become less receptive to new ideas. And in fact, again, there's this idea that your gray matter in your brain, it actually hardens. And so that's where you sort of get the stereotypical, oh, they're like a stubborn old man, right? And what I think is interesting is you have actually, in recent years, as someone who's above the age of 60, you have become receptive to new ideas. And one of the things that has become that way for you has been marijuana. I'm very curious for you to talk about that. What has caused this change for you? And what do you think it means for you?
So I'll tell you, real quickly, as you boys know, a few years ago, I'd say, hey, if you're caught with marijuana, I don't care if it's an ounce or 20 pounds, shoot and kill you. I'm a big proponent of death penalty, by the way, so that, put a little levity here into it. But seriously, why? Because people who were dying to get you that stuff Whatever it is, they were dying. You know what? The alcohol, people can say what they want. No one's dying on the border to get you your high or fix or whatever.
So I just want to make sure I understand.
If
So you're talking about it's more about the source as opposed to the substance itself. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So if people could just trace back when they buy it on the street, where it's coming from, how many people are getting shot on the street in Philadelphia, as an example, how many of those are drug-related and so on, let alone if you work back across the borders down into Latin America, how many people are dying because of that? You know, you don't want to do that. And I remember years ago I had the same problem with it. The source was just dirty. People used to talk about blood diamonds. Same thing. This is even worse because what's going on with the cartels, even to this day, fentanyl, it's horrible. So now that it's legal and I need pain relief and it's controlled, I say this is great. So it does give me some benefit. How much? I don't know. It's another form of intoxication, I think. But there certainly may be absolute valid improvements to people with epilepsy and so on. The stories are too realistic and too common for it to be anecdotal. It's got to be there. I don't think that absolute ties have been made. But now that it's legal in most states, this is a wonderful thing, and it takes away the drug money from the cartels and the people dying to get you the stuff that you're trying to get on the street.
So one thing I'd like to kind of go into a little bit, I know that you've definitely taken like organic chemistry, and I also know that like there is this endocannabinoid system within the body where we have receptors that basically do respond to cannabinoids. And especially for people who are in pain, who are going through that, what is your kind of view on that? Do you think that some of that has been through your own personal experience? I know we've talked personally outside of this specific podcast about some of the problems with a lot of various different pain medications, where there is more of a hit to the liver, whereas if you're dealing with cannabinoids, they tend to be a little bit better in terms of the way your body responds to that. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, so I take Klonopin. I also take Cymbalta. All these synthetic things, I think, give me something natural like the cannabinoid family. I think are far less toxic to the human body. Mm-hmm. So again, coming back to the fact that it's been legalized and so on. Again, though, I worry about the efficacy. I mean, is this something that, hey, it's just another sort of something that's going to soften your brain a little bit so that it feels more relaxed, whatever. But at the end of the day, if it gives you some form of relaxation and it's out of the hands of the cartel and all that stuff out on the street that's making this country turn bad, I say go for it. And luckily, we've seen a lot of improvements that way. Interestingly, as progressive as the state of Delaware, I think is, liberally is, they just voted down, the legalization of marijuana, or decriminalization, whatever you want to call it, which shocked me, but hey, it is what it is. I carry a medical marijuana card, and that's where I get mine.
Yeah, I think you.
And I don't smoke it. I ingest it.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is when you look at a lot of these drugs that have, are outside of the pharmaceutical drugs. That, in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of research that had been started as it relates to can these help medical conditions, medical problems. And that was pretty much all kiboshed, particularly in the 80s with the war on drugs. And what is very interesting now is here we are 50 years later, and all of a sudden there's discussions about, well, wait, not only what are the potential medical benefits of marijuana, but I'm reading articles about what are the potential benefits of what are known as mushrooms or MDMA. And these are things that had been studied, or they were beginning to be studied upon in the 50s and 60s, particularly at schools like Harvard. And then it all got locked down, all got shut down. And what'll be very interesting is we probably won't know the results for another 10 to 15 to 20 years. But what is interesting to think about is these drugs were not studied in the way that they would have if it wasn't for the government shutting them down. Where would we be today if they had been properly studied in the 60s? I don't know where the world, when it comes to these drugs that are outside of your pharmaceutical drugs, where they potentially play a significant role in society. But I think it's very interesting, and I think there's a lot that we still don't understand because it was sort of in that embargo state for such a long time.
Yeah, there was so much, bad press given to some of these as just illicit drugs and so on. They must be horrible things. That, a lot of that, I'm sure the pharmaceutical companies, these are companies that are making boatloads of money on their drugs. And, what are they going to say? Hey, you may want to try medical marijuana? I don't think so.
Right.
So that's why I think a lot of these studies got suppressed. They got, kicked under the can. And, of course, they could point the naughty finger at illicit drugs, sure. But
it all
it's
came back to money.
We've lost yes, it's a shame we've lost so much time with those studies.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, and this will be the last thing I'll say on the topic, but, there's a lot of these drugs that have been proven to help with levels of empathy, right, within individuals. And it's funny, I'm not a clinician by any standards, and I'm not an advocate of drugs per se, other than that I'm a libertarian philosophically. But if there's one thing that this world, I think, needs more of, it's probably an empathy to understand your fellow man. I think especially in the world today where supposedly we're more connected than ever in terms of social media, I think if anything, we're further removed from physically understanding other individuals. And I do wonder if we lost 50 years of science and research to what some of these drugs could have done for ultimately financial gains by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yep. I agree 100%.
So, Dad, you ended up retiring shortly before COVID, and that obviously delayed some of the personal projects that you wanted to work on. What are some of those projects, and what do you want to take advantage with now being retired? What are some of the things that you want to kind of focus on now that you have this time available to you?
So, with my disability, I'm concerned about, as you guys both know, I had a real passion my whole career. I figured I wanted to go back in my retirement, go back and get my PhD in mechanical engineering. And, without waxing too much philosophically here, I had this vested interest with my neck. Mm-hmm. I wanted to focus my research on this, dystonia, and improving the efficacy of any treatment. Right now, there's a lot of money out there by companies like Allergan that just make Botox. Do they want to see a solution? I'm not so sure. Mm-hmm. This is a concern of mine. So I think there are ways to attack this to get to the root cause of problems that economically, there's economic factors that are working against it, and so I'm concerned about that. But while I'm on my soapbox, a couple other things. Politics and society, hypersensitivity. Right now, couldn't believe it. Mom and I were just at a Applebee's the other day, and there was a special that said if the server doesn't ask you or mention the margarita special, you get an appetizer free. Well, I kind of hid this thing underneath so she couldn't see it. Mm-hmm. But I said to Mom, hey, Mom, let's see if she says anything. If she doesn't, I'll take a free appetizer. Well, she didn't say it, and then I piped up, I said, well, what about our free appetizer since you didn't mention the margarita special? And she said, well, I'll happily bring you a coupon for an appetizer next time. But she said just the other day, last week, she said I was scolded by this individual who said, look, I'm a recovering alcoholic. Why do you throw this in my face?
Oh.
I mean, what has gone wrong with society that we're that hypersensitive, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. You don't want alcohol? You don't want alcohol promotional things offered to you? Go to McDonald's. They don't serve it. But why not just say thank you, but we're not interested? That's fine. Mm-hmm. I mean, so hypersensitivity is a serious concern. Diversity, I think we really do need to celebrate. It's what made our nation great. Mm-hmm. Think of the different, especially Alex, and I know down in Atlanta too, Ron, the different restaurants, the different music that we have to listen to today because people from around the world come here. It's just beautiful. Energy, I'm concerned that while I'm on my soapbox here, there's not a good way to produce energy right now. No matter what the form, wind, solar, nuclear, you name it. There's not a good energy source. I am concerned that people dismiss out of hand conservation. Conservation is a near-term benefit if we just tap into it. Waste and garbage, oh my goodness. What we're doing to this country and this world with landfills is unreal. This is not something we should be doing. We need sharp minds to say, let's do a true recycling program that's not a joke. I mean, right now, I don't care what reports you read, it's between 5 and 15% of what we put to the curb. And Mom and I are very good recyclers. Mm-hmm. But what we put to the curb, 5 to 15% is actually put back into the market as useful purpose. Education, I'll just say this. Yes, STEM for sure. I just wish we could make it more appealing to young students, young kids. I'd love to teach a year or two of high school chemistry. I'd love to be a teacher like that teacher and stand and deliver mathematics. Fascinating movie. For teachers out there, watch the movie. Watch it every year, please. But let's get back to the 3 R's. I read a great article years ago. It was in Chemical Digest, I think was the name of the periodical. But it's like more or less cutting it to the short. Let's get back to the basics of education and not deal with social engineering. We're trying to socially engineer and fix all the social ills of society while we're trying to teach kids. Well, no wonder kids are having such a difficult time. So that's a serious problem with me. Shyness. I was shy as shy can be as a kid growing up. But you know what? My passion and curiosity to learn from other people overshadowed that shyness. That's how I got over my shyness. So don't let shyness stand in your way. Don't be at all hesitant to say hello to everybody on the street. And that's the end of my soapbox.
So I have to ask, your soapbox, which everything you just said, I appreciate your candor and honesty and just straightforwardness. I do. And that's something I've always admired about you. What I'm asking is, as a man who's in his mid-60s, you're talking about recycling improvements. These are things that, realistically, the improvements that you're expecting to see are not going to happen in your lifetime. When you look, how do I say this? When you are so passionate about these items, these topics, are you thinking about your legacy? Are you thinking about ways that you can try to push the needle even 1 degree in the right direction for the next generation? I guess what I'm getting at, and I know this is kind of philosophical, but the world is now moving from your generation to the next generation. And I guess my question is fixated in, how do you want to be remembered? Or maybe not at all.
Well, back in honor of Henry, Robert, and Irving Studd, and my father, Dick Studd, Richard Studd, and then you boys. So legacy goes to, do you want to be remembered? Yeah, but is the journey more important? And can I help just blow the needle a little bit, just a little bit? Because a step on a mile's journey, or the AT, the Appalachian Trail, starts with a first step. And that's where we need to step back and say, wait a minute, we want to do something important in life, then take that first step, because the second step will be easier. And when it comes to these important things about the future, I'm not so concerned about Ron Studd. The Brooklyn Bridge with John and his son Washington Roebling. These are great men. Their legacy's built. I don't need to. As much as I admire the Brooklyn Bridge, and I've never walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, I want to do that. Hopefully, darn soon. Mm-hmm. I want to do that. That's high on my bucket list right now. But we need to start getting on with these things that are socially critical for the future of the globe. And those things, I think, if enough Ron Studds out there just voice and start pushing in that direction, anything I can do during the rest of my remaining years to help that's my passion.
Well, and voicing is an important word that you just said. Because, and Ron and I just talked about this on episode, I believe it was the previous episode, it was 49, or maybe it was 48, where we talked about, and it's a weird idea, but the idea is more or less that we'll all be dead at some point in our future. Our children will be dead at some point in the future. But this podcast will live in some ether that in 200 years, somebody, somewhere, maybe a descendant of Ron or me, might just find the podcast and it will be there and might want to listen to this. And in a way, I've come to think of this podcast as a time capsule for the time period. This is discussions of 2022 in this particular episode between two boys and their father that could be listened to in 200 years by someone that we have no idea. And so the things you're saying, the things Ron and I are saying, it might just resonate with somebody. And I think that's important to think about.
So to that point, I think as long as folks know that some portion, maybe the majority of us folks in this time period had reasonality to us. We had some thoughts and we had passion to course correct this thing. That is important for them to know. And so, yes, I want to get more involved with our mom and I in this new community. I want to get more involved with, woodworking and so on. But I want to somehow get involved more globally, even on a state level, of taking 5 to 15% of land, or 5 to 15% of recycling up to 50 to 60%. There's no reason that's not happening. A bottle that's tossed out like this is a massive amount of energy, versus starting with sand, right? You can save a ton of energy by taking this bottle, empty bottle, and just chucking it right into a furnace and remelting it and reusing it 50, 100 times. Doesn't matter. That's what needs to happen.
Fair enough. All right. With the last few minutes of the episode, Ron and I want to talk about some fun stuff. So,
Buffalo Bills.
Yeah.
Go Bills.
So right before the program started, you said to me, you said, Alex and Ron, you said, you guys are doing some sort of annual bet. Buffalo Bills winning a Super Bowl this year. You better count me in. Talk to me about how excited you are. Are you excited? Are you more excited this year going into this upcoming season than you were during the Jim Kelly era? Talk to me. Talk to us. What's going on in your mind?
Yeah, because living through those years was fascinating. What a ride that was, and no one should ever, take anything away from the Kelly era. I mean, going to 4 straight Super Bowls, I don't care if we won or lost, that will never, ever be repeated. And yeah, some of the rules and whatever have changed, but that was fascinating to watch, and it brought great honor onto the city of Buffalo. And I hate it. One time I was in Manchester airport, got in an elevator, someone saw my Bills cap and they said, "Hey, wide right," and I could have kicked the guy. But you know what? Had a nice conversation with the guy and he was fine. People are going to say things that they just don't understand, but wide right is wide right, and that's the way we're remembered. The way we get over that, we get on and we win the Super Bowl. That'll end that conversation. Mm-hmm. Then we win the next one and the next one. Watch this. Coming up, we've got the makings for 4 in a row wins. But it starts with the first one, the first step, the first win. And I'm not so sure the Buffalo Bills that we see today are going to go 4 in a row and take away that old stuff and say, you know what, that's past history. Phenomenal team, phenomenal coach, phenomenal team members. But 4 wins in a row, that's my dream before I die. I'll
tell you this.
And
and I want to open this up to Ron too, which is all we can gauge is recency, right? All we can look at is the most recent games to gauge the future. And when you look at the most recent 2 games that the Bills played in, one was a complete domination and an embarrassment on the national stage of the New England Patriots. I mean, it was a bloodbath. I mean, it was bloody. I mean, I've seen war movies that were less bloody than that game. And then number 2, the shootout with Kansas City, where we lost. But what a shootout. I mean, there was like 6 touchdowns in the last 2 minutes of the game. I mean, it was unbelievable. That's what we're looking at as we project to the future. So my question for you, Dad, and for Ron is, are you excited for this upcoming year? And where are we going to be when the Buffalo Bills are in the Super Bowl?
Ron, why don't you go first?
All right. So I don't want to see the shootout probably ever again, which is unfortunate. I think that's one of those weird curses that I think life has kind of thrown the Bills fans' way. Is like a lot of people initially the day after they were like, that is possibly one of the greatest football games that has ever been filmed.
And it is. For the record, most people are saying that is one of the greatest, objectively. If you're not a Bills fan, you're not a Chiefs fan, it's one of the greatest games in NFL history.
But there's the fact that we know what happens at the end of the story. And you're so close. So that's tough. But I think what's great about this team that we have today is that the team has definitely shown their willingness to learn, to overcome, to take on different challenges. They're not perfect. And, you think you look back to the Kelly era, they were definitely not perfect either. There was a lot, they were referred to as the bickering Bills, right? There was a lot of locker room, challenges that they were facing. And I think it's interesting because this generation now, that what you're seeing is Josh Allen and, the entire offense and the entire defense. Yeah, you've got everybody, you have the different personalities and you have a lot of the different things that are going on. But the big thing that I love is the humility. I think that they represent the city of Buffalo very well. I love the way that the Mafia has kind of come forward. They're very much a selfless, giving organization that really isn't just about, hey, we just need to see our team win. There's so much outreach that we see. And I think that in terms of a team being in the right place in the right time and just having the right things lining up right now, I'm excited. I'm excited about that. And I can't wait to see what's going to happen. Because at the very least, one of the biggest things that I love about our team right now is that when you watch our games, you really don't know what's going to happen. You can see an amazing game, and I give credit to the coaching staff too. They pull things out of their head and the way we execute them. You just don't know what's going to happen for each game. And when they execute things and they do it in such a great way, it makes for an amazing thing to watch. So, yeah, those two last games, excellent games to watch. I wouldn't want to watch that last one again, but I will admit I have definitely gone back and watched that Patriots game probably at least 4 or 5 times now. And it's phenomenal. What about you, Dad? What do you think?
So just the other day I was listening to your episode with Andrew Chisholm, one of my favorite nephews, And he said, hey, when we, the Buffalo Bills, step out on the field and we knock the socks off a team like, Dallas or somebody, for that one day, we are top dogs, that kind of thing. I think that's the humility part, though, is something to be seen. The humility part is something to be witnessed firsthand. And I would welcome any viewer, any listener, come to Buffalo. You're not going to be spit on, ridiculed as a different NFL team.
Unless maybe a Patriots fan.
That's possible.
Well, and that would be due. Right? I'd probably piss on them. I'm sorry.
Anyone other than them will at least be respected.
Yes.
Right.
Or any other team that Tom Brady may decide to play for. But no. All kidding aside, you've got such great talent and humility, and the things that as Andrew pointed out, the gifts of the Mafia, the Bills Mafia, that have given to other cities and so on, and to the city of Buffalo. This is something that's a pride and joy, and I come back to Alex first took me to Hammer's Lot, and I'll tell you, that is something to experience. Yes, you see, Pinto Ron get all plastered down with mustard and ketchup. This is great stuff. You'll see in the crowd thousands of other people, though, that are other team fans, and they're all celebrating the fact that we all love football. This is unique. I swear this is totally unique in the NFL. And this humility is going to rise to the challenge, and we're going to get to the top. And we, the three of us, are going to be in Buffalo watching this game over Imperial Pizza, a plug for Imperial Pizza, charred and cupped, as Alex likes to say, pizza with a pepperoni. We'll be sitting in a hotel room. We'll be out somewhere. In the following days, we're just going to be half smashed, but celebrating with smiles on our faces because our Buffalo Bills went all the way. And that's going to be a glorious thing. And I swear, this is going to be an interesting year. Josh Allen is a great player. I just hope, fingers crossed, he doesn't get hurt. He has certainly got the persona of Buffalo in him.
I've never seen a player with more heart.
Yep.
And objectively speaking,
he's a simple country boy who you look at what he did to get into college, to play football, rejected by all these other schools, to get to where he's certainly one of the very top, if not the top player right now in the NFL.
He is.
I know a lot of teams would love to have him as a quarterback.
And you know what? He loves the city of Buffalo.
And he loves the city of Buffalo. And for those who haven't gone to the city of Buffalo in the last forever, or in the last few years, 10 years, go. You're going to see something that's not looking like what you think. And you know what? Yes, we get some snow, but that's okay. If you're hardy, we love the snow. We say bring it on in the middle of winter. Welcome to our hometown.
So I think at the end of the day, and Ron and I have talked about this on numerous times on this show, at the end of the day, Buffalo Bills are the one time that we are on the national stage with the rest of the country. And it's a wonderful thing when we can celebrate the successes of an otherwise forgotten region of the country. So I know this. I've said this to every manager I've ever had. When the Bills win the Super Bowl. Well, I always say this. On my first day whenever I have a new manager. Literally, since I graduated college, this is what I've done. Nice to meet you, blah, 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 pleasantries, blah, blah. By the way, just so you know, if the Bills are ever in the Super Bowl, and they always start laughing right there. I go, if they win, no, I always start the other way. I go, if they lose on Sunday, you'll hear from me on Wednesday. You'll hear from me. If they win, you'll hear from me the following Tuesday. And they always laugh.
Because you're going to be...
They always laugh, and they do. Yeah, and I go, I'm serious. And I anticipate streaking. I anticipate a lot of things. I don't care. They throw me in jail. You think the city of Buffalo is going to throw me in jail for streaking in the middle of February and it's snowing out after the Bills win the Super Bowl? No way. No way. They will totally embrace me streaking in the streets of South Buffalo. That's what I plan on doing.
I can tell you for a fact, though, you won't be the first.
No.
The two Rons here will be out front. And Ron Jr. here, he'll probably be ahead of me. He'll be running around in a parking lot out in Orchard Park, even though they're playing out in San Diego or something. Not San Diego, wherever it is playing. Yeah. But get this, Ron is a diehard Bills fan, and the three of us studs are.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't get any prettier than that. And Tim Russer, bless his heart.
Yeah.
We're going to live to see what he never got to see.
For sure.
And you can just see that one interview with him. He says, we've got the Buffalo Bills.
We do.
Everyone else got a lot of other things. We've got the Buffalo Bills. And he meant that with a lot of humility and a lot of heart. And that's Western New York in total.
For sure. Last question of the night. Mr. Ron Studd Sr., we've hit you with a lot of questions.
Yeah.
This is the last one. Ron and I are very fortunate. We have... I I don't call them fans. I call them friends of the show who listen to episodes. Because we're so engaged. I feel like most of our listeners are people who may have been on the show or we plan to have on the show. We have a loyal, small following, but it has made this such a treat and a delight for us. We enjoy doing this. We started during COVID to pass the time and to talk with people who we find to be interesting. And we've made it a little bit of a small thing, and it's been fun, and it's been a pleasure and an honor to do this show. You have listened to as many episodes as anybody. Let's get it. It's the time. It's episode 50. Just let us have it. What do you think of the show? Is it complete garbage? Should we just close up shop? Should we not even finish season 2? Just be honest with us. What's going on, Dad?
All right, so you know what? I haven't listened to a lot of other podcasts. There's the one guy, I guess he's top dog.
Joe Rogan.
Yes. I've listened to his a few times. I'll tell you what, I think in my mind, and of course I'm your father, so fathers need to be a little bit behind their kids. But honestly, you guys have such a collection, an eclectic collection of friends and topics that you guys talk about. I look back on the ones, almost all that you've recorded, and I'm just taken by what you guys have done. From that little trip we took from El Paso going on over to San Diego years ago to today, episode 50, you've got at least another 250 episodes in you. You're doing it with simple passion. Your message is simple. Hey, you are a friend, you are a relative, you are a complete stranger almost, but not. One thing, Buffalo Bills, Western New York, your love of the food, cheese curds, you name it, beef on wick, beef and barrel, the list goes on and on, Olean, Salamanca. This is a little bit of the world that has just got some wonderful human beings that live simple lives to many, but are so rich in many, many respects. And for that, I'm out of my sauce, but at the end of the day, cheers to Western New York, our roots, where Robert and
Henry,
Robert
and Irving,
and Henry Studds, and Dick,
Cheers.
and Dick,
and Ron Sr. settled their roots. So to that, I'm just glad to be part of that heritage of Western New York.
Is there an episode or two that particularly stand out to you? I think the audience would be curious to know that.
Well, I'll tell you, I think you've had so many good ones. I hate to pick one. I'd hate to pick one and then overstep somebody. I mean, to me, I think you have gotten to know your people so well. Even the tall fellow that you met on the Bourbon Trail.
Stuart Gray.
Stuart, yep.
What a fascinating episode that was. I don't know. I mean, there's so many. The fellow who works for QVC.
Justin
I
Sachoka.
loved every minute.
Yep.
Tim Chubb, to me, was dynamite. I listened to that twice. Both pieces. I just listened to Jameson Mangan. And the beauty is you've got, between the two of you, you've got such a rich field to draw from. I mean, it's going to go endless, right? You've got endless people to draw from as guests. I think, and you will steadily increase. I do want to talk to you about Malort and so on, continued sponsorship. I think we need to ratchet that up. And I need to get you another sponsor. I'll just take a little message here. I helped get them the sponsorship for Malort.
He absolutely did.
But we need to ratchet this up, right? We want to get Between Two Studs known as much as this other guy, Logan.
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan.
Rogan. Hey, whoever heard of Joe Rogan? Did you listen to the latest episode of Between Two Studs? That's the mantra we want in the future. And what? For money? No, for fun. That's the difference.
I love it.
I love your
That's the
optimism.
difference.
Yeah.
Love your positivity.
Well, I love you boys. I love you boys.
Love you as well.
I give you a hug.
We're all
Man.
we are all about 1,000 miles away from each other.
Yeah, but we're doing it. We're managing with
It's
technology.
like an equidistant triangle.
Yeah.
But we're
Yes.
here. We're here. With that, I don't know how else to say it, Ron. This concludes episode 50. 50. We got to hang out with Ron Studd Sr., who has such a influence directly, indirectly, consciously, and subconsciously with our show. And one of the things you alluded to it earlier, and it's true, is when we were developing the show while we were on our road trip, you were in the back seat. Ron and I were in the front seat. We were chatting about this idea, but you were the only other person that was in the car who was there. And it's totally possible that you were in the back seat and said, "That's a dumb idea. Don't do it." And that would have been the end of it. But you were positive, and here we are 50 episodes later. So thank you. We are so appreciative.
Just one other point on that. What was the one on the hamburger guy, Five Guys or whatever? We were listening to that one podcast.
Oh, that's a totally different podcast called How I Built This. And I recommend checking it out.
Right.
Yeah. Check out,
I thought
that was a shout out to another podcast called How I Built This with Guy Raz. Check that out. But very thankful.
Yes.
Very thankful for your support and your appreciation and your love as always.
Love you guys.
Me too.
Best of luck to you as in the future. Let's go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go
Let's
Bills.
go Bills.